Alrighty, good evening. I wanted to call the Monday, June 24th meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Madam Clerk, can you call roll, please?
Yes. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Ms. Flynn?
Here.
Mrs. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Ms. Underhill?
Here.
And Mayor Hardy.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
And if everyone could join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Terrific. Do I have a motion to adopt our meeting agenda tonight?
Move to adopt the meeting agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. Meeting is adopted. Let's move on to our special proclamations for tonight. First up is our proclamation declaring July 2024 as Disability Pride Month in the City of Falls Church, and Vice Mayor Shantz-Hiscott will do the honors.
Thank you. Whereas on July 26, 1990, the United States Congress enacted the Americans with Disabilities Act, a comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities that protects millions of Americans from discrimination. And whereas Disability Pride Month coincides with the anniversary of the ADA's passage and builds on the celebration of the law by recognizing something just as important, the movement by disabled people, for disabled people, to increase visibility and uplift the lived experiences and contributions of the disabled community. And whereas Disability Pride empowers those with disabilities to define their own identity, break down stigma and stereotypes of those with disabilities, and serves as a tool to tackle the ableism that persists to this day. And whereas disability comes in many forms, physical, mental, sensory, and invisible or undiagnosed, and therefore results in many different lived experiences, perspectives, and accessibility needs. And whereas Disability Pride Month encourages us to acknowledge the diversity and nuance of issues within the disabled community in order to better understand and address continuing discrimination and inequality together. And whereas the City of Falls Church is committed to building a community that acknowledges, welcomes, and supports disabilities and strives to provide disability equity. And whereas the city recognizes that addressing accessibility in the community in transportation, engagement, government services, and more will actively help reach the city's 2040 vision of being a vibrant, walkable, safe, small city that keeps pace with regional growth while strengthening our identity as a special place.
Now, therefore, I, Letty Hardy, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the month of July 2024 as Disability Pride Month in the City of Falls Church, and urge all to respect and honor our diverse community and celebrate and build a culture of inclusiveness and acceptance. Do we have anyone in the audience helping accept the proclamation? Okay. If not, we will save it, and thank you very much. Up next is our proclamation declaring July 2024 as Park and Recs Month in the City of Falls Church, and Councilwoman Flynn, as the liaison to the board, will do the honors.
Thank you. Whereas Parks and Recreation is an integral part of communities throughout this country, including the City of Falls Church, where our parks are spread throughout the city for easy access for all. And whereas Parks and Recreation promotes health and wellness, improving the physical and mental health of people who live near parks. And whereas Parks and Recreation promotes time spent in nature, which positively impacts mental health by increasing cognitive performance and well-being and alleviating illnesses such as depression, attention deficit disorders, and Alzheimer's. And whereas Parks and Recreation encourages physical activities by providing space for popular sports, hiking trails, and playgrounds, and many other activities designed to promote active lifestyles. And whereas Parks and Recreation is a leading provider of older adult programming, providing social interactions and recreational activities for a vulnerable population. And whereas Parks and Recreation programming and education activities such as summer camp programming, youth sports, and enrichment activities are critical to childhood development. And whereas Parks and Recreation increases a community's economic prosperity through increased property values, expansion of the local tax base, increased tourism, the attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction. And whereas Parks and Recreation is fundamental to the environmental well-being of our community. And whereas Parks and Recreation is essential and adaptable infrastructure that makes our communities resilient in the face of natural disasters and climate change. And whereas our parks serve as the home to thousands of trees, maintaining the city's status as a Tree City USA, as well as ensure the ecological beauty of our community and provide a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. Whereas the U.S. House of Representatives has designated July as Parks and Recreation Month, and whereas the City of Falls Church recognizes the benefits derived from parks and recreation resources.
Now therefore, I, Letty Hardy, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim July as Parks and Recreation Month and encourage our community to take advantage of the excellent parks, programs, and amenities in the City of Falls Church, Virginia. And it looks like we have our Rec and Parks team in the audience. If you all would like to come forward, and thank you very much for all that you do and our wonderful programming in our parks. Welcome, Mr. Schlitt.
Thank you so much. Mayor Hardy and Council. I have with me tonight our Deputy Director, Amy Youngs. I don't see any of the advisory board members from the Recreation and Parks Department, but I'm going to just say a few things and then we can go from there. But the mission of the Falls Church Recreation and Parks Department is to provide year-round program of recreation, leisure time activities for all groups and interest levels. The department is dedicated to enhancing the quality of life and fostering a sense of community by providing superior recreational, educational, and cultural services through the effective maintenance and protection of the city's natural resources. In my opinion, a little biased, but I believe we do this quite well. Our parks provide opportunities to the entire community for passive or active recreation. Users can go for a stroll in Crossman, play pickleball at Cavalier Trail, take a skateboarding class at West End, or enjoy a concert in Cherry Hill. Children build confidence playing in our youth basketball program and on a stage at our annual dance recitals. They enhance their social skills in our summer fun playground program. They join us for camps and classes to learn new skills such as cooking, chess, fishing, and much more. Our award-winning farmers market is there for the community year-round, not only as an opportunity to purchase local food, but to run into neighbors, listen to some music, and enjoy the outdoors, then stop by the Cherry Hill Farmhouse for a tour, a tea, or to learn some history. Our Senior Center membership has grown to over 500 members and includes educational opportunities offered through partner organizations such as Marymount University. Regular programming to include chair volleyball or bingo days and plenty of exercising opportunities to include fitness and the very popular pickleball club. From open gym to the Memorial Day Parade and Festival to a Saturday spent at the soccer field, we strive to provide something for everybody and truly believe when it comes to recreation and parks, the benefits are endless. Thank you for tonight's proclamation. To continue this celebration throughout the month of July, we have a the T-Rex scavenger hunt, some pop-up events in our parks, and to finish things off, we will have a Park Palooza on Wednesday, July 31st in Cherry Hill Park. We invite you to join us for cornhole, giant Jenga, fun races, games, and entertainment. And thank you again for this proclamation.
Thank you very much. Would you like to come up to receive the proclamation?
Sure, Amy.
Yeah, and we have some comments up here too, so Danny and Amy don't go away yet.
Danny,
Ms. Connolly?
I just want to point out that I'm pretty sure every single person in this room has been positively affected by your department, whether that's little, you mentioned all the different things, but from the time most people who live in Falls Church as children were little up until they're seniors, those of us that have lived here for more than 30 years or less, I mean, there's something for everybody at Rec and Parks, and so much community building and friendships that have been forged. through sports programs and arts programs. I can trace back, like, oh, I met that lady when we did the little baby sing-along, and oh, this is my friend who I met in Cherry Hill Park. So I think that is also one of those wonderful benefits of what your department does. So thank you.
Well said. Anyone else? Yeah, really, I think you guys provide great program services across generations and create so much community building. So thank you all for that.
Thank you.
And thank you for continuing. Speaking of across all generations, before we move off of special proclamations, we have a surprise one tonight. This is actually our last meeting before July, when we have an important anniversary. We have a special proclamation recognizing Mr. Snyder's 30 years of service to the city. And so it's not on our agenda, but we recognize that we've invited his family and multiple generations, and so we wanted to recognize him for that. So if you'll allow me to read the proclamation. Whereas David F. Snyder has served the City of Falls Church continuously over the past 30 years, holding positions as member, vice mayor, and mayor in the City Council of Falls Church. And whereas Mr. Snyder was first elected to a council seat in 1994, and throughout his tenure has advocated for fiscal responsibility, quality education, responsible economic development, historic preservation, affordable housing, social justice, and a government based on democratic ideals and public participation. And whereas Mr. Snyder has a deep appreciation of the city's history and commitment to recognizing all who have contributed to the City of Falls Church, demonstrated through his leadership in preserving historic structures across the city and acquiring land and developing the Tinner Hill Historic Site in partnership with the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. And whereas he has shown his commitment to making Falls Church a welcoming place for all as a founding member of the Falls Church Housing Corporation, as a champion for legislation to repudiate a 1915 segregation ordinance, and with his support for City Council's affordable housing initiatives. And whereas Mr. Snyder's service on the City Council Legislative Committee has been integral to its success, helping the city build relationships that resulted in successful advocacy for local authority and funding support from the General Assembly. And whereas Mr. Snyder has become a regional authority on transportation issues through his representation of the city on regional organizations, including the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and the Virginia Transit Association. And whereas he has also served the local, national, and international community through his personal and work-related volunteer efforts, through which he has helped support causes of international diplomacy, support for the unhoused, disaster relief, and more. And whereas the city wishes to recognize the contributions Mr. Snyder has made to the community in the course of his 30 years of public service on the City Council. Now, therefore, I, Letty Hardy, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim July 1st as David F. Snyder Public Service Recognition Day in the City of Falls Church, and thank Mr. Snyder for his 30-plus years of public service to the city. Congratulations, and thank you.
Could I ask my family to come up here? Just recognize them. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
So first, my wife Edie, who made it all possible in every way. Son Richard, his wife Michelle, daughter Sarah, husband Mike, and the little one, Cole.
He was ridiculous.
That's hilarious.
Like, all the time.
There you go. There we go. Ah.
It's getting close to bedtime.
I know. It's my bedtime, too.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks a lot. Could I just make a couple comments? if I
Absolutely.
might? First of all, I want to thank all my colleagues here and all the colleagues that I've served with over the years. I'm deeply honored by this proclamation, but in a larger sense, it should be considered a recognition of every citizen and their families who have come forward to serve on the City Council, the School Board, the Planning Commission, every other board and commission, and every citizen and employee and manager who has otherwise given themselves for this community. In the early days, I was extremely fortunate to have been schooled in local government by the people who literally created the Falls Church we know today. Many had lived through the Great Depression, helped defeat Nazi Germany in World War II, and continue to play important roles in national and international forums. Locally, they embedded in our fabric of government the values of excellent public schools and a responsive and effective local government that strives to do everything well with a strong commitment to public safety, environmental, cultural, historic, neighborhood preservation, high ethical standards, and regional leadership. Just very briefly, our challenge today, just as it has been the past 30 years, is to act consistent at all times with those principles that have made the City of Falls Church a truly unique enterprise in all the world. Paraphrasing Benjamin Franklin's comments after the Constitution was signed, when asked whether a monarchy or a republic had been created, he responded, "A republic if you can keep it." We have a great city if we can keep it, and so far we have. I'll end with a positive message. I was serving coffee to a homeless man during a pandemic and asked him how he was doing. He answered fine, and then he asked me the same question, to which I responded, "So far so good." You know what he said in response? Quote, "And you should think that it only gets better from here." That is my hope and commitment. So far, so good here, but let's make the future of our city even better. And thanks to everyone, and I much appreciate this recognition. Thank you.
Yeah,
Ms.
can I
Conley?
add something on there? So in addition to all the wonderful words in the proclamation, I also would like to just say congratulations to Mr. Snyder. And I just did a little bit of math up here, and maybe there's people that are more mathy than me, but I'm pretty sure he's served for 30 years, and our city is 75 years old, which means he served for 40% of the time that the city has existed. Is that right? That's a lot. That's a large percentage. I think it's really, it's great that you mentioned the generations that came before you, because you have been a mentor to the next generation of people and served as a role model for service on the council and in your community and in the world. And I thank you for that. You are a master politician and a campaigner, and Dave and I run on the same cycle, so we often run into each other when we're campaigning. And at the farmer's market, you know, he is out there talking to everybody so impressively on your, you know, the fifth time you ran for office, you were just as enthusiastic as the first time. So that is also very impressive. And last, I just want to say that everyone I've served with in the time that I've been on council, which isn't nearly even half of what Dave has done, everybody has a specialty. Everyone has something that they're really good at, and you're good at a lot of things, and we rely on you in the city to represent us in the regional government and transportation issues, clean air issues, and many other things. So thank you for that as well.
Great. Justine?
I feel like I've been a small blip on your timeline, but I can at least speak to that blip. Thank you for the advice that you've given me as I've been starting out, and as Mary Beth mentioned, mentoring new people that come up through the ranks. You've given me advice that to hold close to my heart, the experience that I went through as a commissioner in DuPont, and more recently, that it's okay to ask even more questions. And that is something I did use last week at a regional meeting. And speaking of regional meetings, I know that from talking with you and other people in the transportation space, you've done a mighty job representing our small community's interests on a regional level. Thank you for your work, not just for last week, but especially for last week, but for all that you do behind the scenes that might not get noticed on a daily basis. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Ms. Flynn?
I'll be brief instead of rehashing the proclamation. But I just wanted to thank you for your service, for your insight, for your institutional knowledge, for your good nature and your goodwill. And so for all the years that you've dedicated to the city, and to thank your family as well for sharing you with us for decades at this point. So thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I too, when I saw your family all come up here, I kept thinking, like, that's almost their whole lives you've been on council. And some literally their whole lives you've served on council. And what a sacrifice that has been for your family as well, to have you attend all these meetings week in, week out, month in, year in, decade in. So thanks to you, congratulations on this milestone, and congratulations to your family as well, because it really is a family affair, and all of those up here know how important that is to have that support. So congrats.
Great. Well, congrats again, Mr. Snyder. I think 30 years of service is really quite remarkable, so thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Let's move on to the next item on our agenda. Do we have oaths of office to administer to board and commission members?
We don't have any tonight, thank you.
Okay, well, let's move on to receipt of public comment then. Could you sum up written comments we received so far, please?
I certainly can. These are the written comments received since the last regular meeting. Beverly Burke wrote to ask why traffic cameras were not used to enforce speed limits and reported on reckless driving incidents on West Street. And the following provided comments on the council's strategic priorities, which you'll be hearing about later. That was the Urban Forestry Commission and Bob Kravinsky, who is also a member of the Housing Commission. And that's it for tonight. Thanks.
Great. Let's move on to receipt of public comment. Do we have any speaker slips for tonight?
We do. And we will remind everybody that there's a 3-minute limit for comments, and the lights will tell you when it turns yellow, you have 30 seconds to sum up. And the first person we have is Dwayne Myers, and followed by Matthew Cunningham.
Thank you. I've been here before on this. I live in Gresham Place, so no need to belabor this, but the traffic light stays green for northbound traffic on North Washington. And I appreciate there are efforts underway to fix that, but that hazardous condition still exists. Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Matthew Cunningham.
Hello, Matthew Cunningham, 138 Birch Street. I live at the Falls Plaza residence, and I just wanted to come and speak on my own behalf in regards to the bike master plan and the connector between the high school and the rest of the community. I am very pro bike lane. I want to emphasize that as much as I can, and I just hope that for the residents that live in the Falls Plaza community, we balance the need for privacy and kind of a buffer zone, and the need for safe transportation for students and residents. My property would be within about 25 feet of the new bike path as proposed in version 1, option 1. So I would just hope that the city would continue with their maybe tree planting efforts as they plan for that bike path to maybe create some type of buffer zone, and just some visual shading. Yeah, thank you all for everything that you do.
Great. Thank you for your comment on that.
Thank you. And that's it. We do have one speaker for the public hearing tonight, so we'll wait for that.
Okay. Mr. Shields, I know in the last update we got from city staff, on June 7th for the Gresham Light, there was field design work completed. Is there any other updates while Mr. Meyer is still in the audience?
Well, thank you, Council, and Mr. Myers and I spoke before this meeting, and we'll follow up, to keep him and other members of the Gresham Place Homeowners Association informed on our progress. And I see Ms. Messer has stood up. She might have any additional information she could add for the folks who live at Gresham Place.
I just wanted to note we had a meeting with VTTI this afternoon, who is our partner on that, and the 30% design plans are still on schedule for July, so it's progressing as we planned.
So we're very committed to getting this done. It has our attention, and it is going to happen. We just have to work through a process to get there, and we recognize that it's been slower than the Gresham folk residents would like, but we're working very hard to get this accomplished.
Great. Well, thank you for keeping the HOA and the neighborhood updated as well. Okay. Well, let's move on to report of the city manager. Mr. Shields?
Well, thank you, Mayor Hardy and members of council. If I could, I do have a couple of things I'd like to report on tonight, but if I could start with an introduction of our new Director of Communications, Mary Catherine Chase. And wanted to just let her say hello to the City Council. We're very excited to have her join the city staff in this really important leadership position. Mary Catherine joins us from the University of George Washington School of Business, where she was the Director of Marketing and Communications there. She is a resident of the city and someone who's been a consumer of city information for many years, and I think has a very clear vision for how we can carry our communications mission forward. It's really at the center of everything we're trying to do as a city, to encourage our community to be well-informed and engaged in all of the things we're trying to do as a city. One last thing I will note, Mary Catherine comes by her love of local government honestly. She is the daughter of a mayor. Her father was mayor of a city in Florida along the Space Coast, and so she grew up seeing how local government works at that level. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, council members.
Thank you, Cindy. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As Wyatt has said, I grew up watching my father on city council meetings. Where's your dad? Oh, well, he's on TV. Click on local public access. I spent my career working for nonprofits, governments, and higher education institutions, ensuring that the commitment that all that work for the organizations are able to be as empowered as they can be through communications. I see my role as promoting, protecting, and defending the city that I've been a resident in for 10 years. So it is both a pleasure and an honor to join you all tonight. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. I also would like to take the opportunity to thank Maggie Redden, who was our interim communications director after Susan Finarelli's left, and she did a great job, and she is right now on a very well-deserved vacation. So congratulations and thank you to Maggie. A note for the public, the Bike Master Plan is going through a series of town hall meetings. One of the speakers tonight spoke about the east-west connection, which is a very important corridor, safe route to school for cyclists to get to the Meridian High School campus. And we're looking through some innovative options for that, which includes a potential route through land owned by the Falls Chase and the Gates of Falls Church homeowners associations. We have met with the two homeowners associations and we're working through kind of what that might look like. There'll be many steps in that process, but it is a very interesting potential safe route to school for our students, teachers, parents, and the entire community. Tomorrow night, Tuesday, June 25th, we'll have a meeting to discuss possible bike facilities along Northwest Street. And so we'll meet on Northwest Street near the intersection of Highland Avenue and Northwest at 6 p.m. and have a walking tour. And then on Thursday this week, June 27th, we'll have a walking tour of Southwest Street, and there we'll meet at Southwest and Parker and also at 6 p.m. Everyone is welcome, but those walking tours are really intended to take the concepts that have been developed and then walk with residents along the street so we can really think about that at the street level with their transportation engineering staff, with their planning staff, with city council and planning commission members all together. So all are welcome to those two events. One note for the public's interest, for the 4th of July, we will not be having the fireworks display at the high school. The high school baseball field will be under construction, and that makes it so we can't have the fireworks there. So I just wanted folks to be aware of that. Do look on the city website for other options. Of course, we will have the reading of the documents, which is sponsored by VPUS. That is every year on Independence Day. And so there are still meaningful ways to celebrate Independence Day in the City of Falls Church, and you can find out more about that on the city website. Lastly, I just wanted to provide congratulations to our city treasurer, Jody Acosta. She's being sworn in this week as the president of the the State Association of Treasurers. And it's really good, I think, for the city to have Jody take on this statewide leadership role. Jody is also very active with our investment boards, where the city's funds are invested in a pooled way with local governments across Virginia. That's a very important function that she does statewide as well. But congratulations to Jody on being president of the statewide association. And then lastly, if I could just share one memory of early in my tenure working with Dave Snyder. There have been two really big storms that caused a lot of destruction in the city. One was Hurricane Isabel, which happened about 4 days after I joined the city. And the other was the derecho in 2012. But Hurricane Isabel was my introduction to Dave Snyder, because he came by City Hall to check things out, and we ended up jumping in a truck together and driving across the city. This is right after the storm had moved out, and we were pulling limbs out of the street, which we probably weren't supposed to be doing because we didn't have proper safety equipment on. But it was just one of those experiences I had with Councilmember Snyder that I'll never forget. And all the things that were said from the dais about Dave's leadership regionally has been very impactful as well. And the last thing I will say is the art of politics, I think, at the local level is listening very carefully to the community and then finding the right compromises between competing values in terms of making key decisions for the city and how the city will progress. And Dave has done that 30 years, I think, listened very carefully and tried to find where the community is on issue after issue, and has done so very consistently, and something that I think I've learned a lot from over the 30 years in terms of how he has done that. Thank you and congratulations. That's all I have to report tonight.
I guess on the agenda, it says that we're supposed to talk about the 2024 General Assembly actions, but while we gave your report, I wonder whether we should actually do any council requests or responses to yours before, otherwise it'll feel a little disjointed, if that's okay, Ms. Mester.
Sure.
Do we have council requests or follow-ups for Mr. Shields? Ms. Flynn?
I just wanted to say a welcome to Mary Catherine Chase. As Ms. Connolly said earlier, a lot of us meet through the Rec and Parks Department, and Mary Catherine and I actually met playing tennis in an adult tennis class offered by Rec and Parks years ago, and I don't think at the time I thought I would be sitting here, that Mary Catherine thought that she would be the new communications director for the city, so it does kind of show the ways that we cross paths and then continue to cross paths as we each, contribute in different ways locally. Then separately, I did have a council request, and I think you had actually mentioned this at some point in time, Mr. Shields, but I had a resident question about flight patterns again over the city, and were they increasing frequency of flight patterns? And I couldn't remember if you had previously said something about interjurisdictional studies that we do every so often, and that one might be taking place or coming up at some point soon.
Well, that might be a good segue to Cindy's discussion about the General Assembly. Cindy has been tracking that regional effort, and Congressman Don Beyer has been working very hard on the noise issues that the region experiences from helicopters and from aviation. So she can speak to that. And I don't know if you want to speak to that off the cuff, or we might need to follow up on that later.
Any other requests, questions? I had one on July 4th. Do we expect that going forward we'll be able to resume, or is this kind of a permanent change to not be able to do it?
Well, I think Mr. Schlitt will always be fighting for us to have the right to conduct fireworks. The difficulty is that the school is planning to have an artificial turf for the baseball field so it can be used year-round. And that's not a good surface for launching fireworks just because of the fire hazard. So it is looking that way, that we will not be able to shoot there in the future.
Well, since it is Rec and Parks Month, maybe we can ask the Rec and Parks Board to look at alternatives. And I know that we have other ways of celebrating July 4th in the city already, but I think people always cherish that as a really great tradition. So it would be great to look at alternatives if we can't do real live fireworks. So, great. Okay. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the 2024 General Assembly actions. Ms. Mester.
Good evening. Let me do the noise ordinance really quick, and then we'll jump into the General Assembly. So that is something that Congressman Byer has been working very closely with FHAA, and we're in a one-year pilot where they're doing some more data analysis and adjusting flights. A year ago, when we officially kicked it off, there were some changes, and so we're monitoring, but we don't, and we get quarterly reports, but we haven't seen any next steps yet, but in process. With that, we are glad to be here this evening to give you a 2024 General Assembly post-briefing update, and I am joined by Alex Lee, who you all have met during the process as our legislative intern. So we're going to do this presentation jointly. I've asked Alex to kick it off, and then we'll do some updates on this partnership. So Alex.
All right. Put this up here. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to present this post-General Assembly briefing. And I'm hopeful I can contribute more, especially now that I'm doing an internship at Housing and Human Services. So with that said, this evening, no council action is requested, but we would like your input on in light of potential city code changes because of changing state laws, and also because of the approaching 2025 General Assembly session. And as the City Council recall, they adopted the 2024 legislative program in November of 2023, with several organizations providing input. And during the course of the legislative session, the City Council's Legislative Committee also met several times to discuss legislative developments and priorities. And during February, the City Council also went down to Richmond for Local Government Day to discuss and have a productive meeting on crucial legislative items. Now, I'm going to give a top-level overview of the general bills that were introduced and how they did in the course of the 2024 legislative session. So in total, across the House and the Senate, 3,595 bills were introduced. Out of those bills, there were 845 that passed and approved, but I will also note that 909 also failed, 405 were continued to the next session, and notably, 201 were vetoed by the governor. And moving into the individual categories for these bills, I will first start with the, Ms. Mester would like to introduce. Yep.
Okay, before Alex goes into some of the specific bills, I'd like to draw your attention to line 111, where we wanted to highlight a few of the subsequent actions and things we've happened since the General Assembly session ended, as well as what's ongoing, because it's clearly a year-round process with a lot of intensity during the General Assembly session, but year-round. So we did want to highlight that, of course, the charter amendment did pass during this General Assembly session after the third attempt, and on May 28th, Council already has adopted an update to the ordinance to implement that. So that's positive progress already. The legislation did approve governing bodies to update council salaries. There's an increased cap, and the city attorney sent out on May 11th an email specifying how to do that, what changed. Public hearing is still required. It's still tied to the general election. And so that is one item that staff would welcome any direction on whether to proceed or not, and then we can work on scheduling that into your workload and your strategic priorities. We've already started working on implementing the electronic meeting code changes, and the city clerk has been reviewing that with the city attorney. We hope end of July to be bringing an update. Not significant changes, as we know, every year is sort of small incremental changes, but for boards and commission, it does increase some opportunities for virtual meetings. Accessory dwelling units was a legislative item through the General Assembly this past session, and council has already had a work session on that, and staff is starting to work on developing that for follow-up in September. Canopy coverage is another good area with the City Arborist and Urban Forestry Commission already starting their work. Zoning is working on a technical list of changes, as Mr. Shields has reported, so that would be coming back to City Council. And recently, in the beginning of June, the city attorney also provided an update on the changes to the towing ordinance. And so state code, which would allow, if council wishes to implement those, and require an ordinance change. And so that is one that staff would also welcome any direction if you would like to have it considered as part of your overall initiatives and workload. At line 147, just wanted to highlight some of the work that staff will be doing between now and next General Assembly, because as Alex indicated, a lot of bills were carried over to the next session. Most of those were sent to studies. So the JLARC will be doing a lot of studies, which is our Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission. Virginia Housing Commission will have several very important relevant things to council's work plan, and the accessory dwelling units is one of those. There is a state joint committee on public transit, and that is specifically tied to the WMATA money that was in this year's General Assembly budget. It's running very important in parallel to the work we're doing with the COG WMATA Task Force, as well as a lot of work with NVTC, so that will be an important one that we're monitoring. There's a lot of important stuff on youth, mental health, community services boards that are going to studies, so staff will need to be tracking that, including co-responder crisis services, supportive housing, and opioid and other harmful drugs. The governor, as many of us have seen in the news, is removing the state from RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiatives, as well as pursuing changing the car emissions so that we're not under what's commonly referred to as the California standards. Both of that impacts greenhouse gas emissions and the emphasis that City Council has on energy. So we'll be monitoring both legal court cases as well as any legislative actions that are follow-up. And then the last thing to note is the General Assembly actually had a special session too. Sort of last minute, they came back to Richmond to deal with the military tuition assistance for survivors and dependents, as well as possibly the skilled games legislation, both of which were vetoed by the governor during the last session. The Senate met on the 18th, were unable to reach any consensus, so nothing happened. The House is set to meet the end of this week on the 28th, and we'll keep staff and council apprised. The military dependents would definitely have an impact for the city, directly not legal skills, but those bills are sort of being pitted against each other, so we'll monitor to see what the outcome is. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that have happened since the General Assembly, things we're working on, and then Alex is going to highlight a few key bills, and then, of course, we'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right. I will start off by talking about bills that relate to preschool or K-12 school funding, and that was one of the first priorities identified in the legislative program. So first of all, there's SB 14 and or HB 805, and that bill dealt with using sales taxes and additional taxes in localities to support schools. And I will also note that that bill incorporated several other bills which had a similar purpose of increasing the funding for schools. In addition, in this category, there was SB 105 or HB 624. That bill was dealing with giving the at-risk program and establishing that for English language learner students and changing the ratio of instructional positions, something that was explicitly identified in the legislative program. And this bill also incorporated several other bills that were in the House and the Senate, including SB 127, 128, and 187, just to name a few. Moving on, there's also the category of transportation, pedestrian safety and walkability, and street safety. In that category, a major one was HB 20, and Oh, I should note so far that both of the bills in school funding were unfortunately vetoed. And for HB 20, the bill was continued to the next session, but that bill dealt with photo monitoring devices and their locations, so authorizing localities to place devices to monitor traffic. And that bill also incorporated several other bills, such as HB 521, 533, and 905. In the same section, there's also HB 1072, which would expand the definition of a school crossing zone to include areas surrounding schools, and that's also another priority that was identified in the legislative program. Moving on to local authority, one of the major ones was HB 147, which essentially dealt with swatting and giving localities better means to deal with swatting as a phenomenon. And there's that bill unfortunately failed. And moving on, there's SB 721, which related to local government actions and comprehensive plans. That bill was continued to the next session, but it would have revised local government land use approval processes. As a transition between local authority and stormwater, environmental, and energy, there is SB 305. And SB 305 was relating to gas leaf blowers as so it would give the city better means to control gas leaf blowers and to potentially ban them. And in environmental, there's also HB 405, which would establish electrical vehicle charging facilities, and that bill was vetoed. So that would have directed the state to make further provisions and expand on that aspect. Moving on, there was affordable housing and tenants' rights, and all three bills in this category were quite important. Number one is SB 304, which was continued to the next session, and this required the locality to include in zoning ordinances ADUs, and that's a major priority of the city in the legislative program. There was also preserving and creating affordable housing, so HB 1398 created a framework for localities to preserve housing, and this bill was vetoed. There was also in the same subcategory HB 1446, and that was the assessment of real property used for affordable housing. So that also related to that aspect. And there was also the topic of electronic participation or public meetings. SB 36 or HB 1818 passed, and that bill dealt with amending the definition of a meeting for the purposes of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And I think Ms. Mester wanted to talk about HB 894.
Yeah, this is the one that we wanted to highlight for you that the city clerk and city attorney will be looking at to consider an update for public meeting electronic participation. It does allow advisory boards to now have up to 50% of the meetings virtual. Before it was 2 or 25%, now it's 2 or 50%, so it gives a little more flexibility. They still cannot be consecutive. There's still technology and quorum and video camera stuff that will make sure compliant, but it does provide a little more flexibility. So that's one we'll bring back for an update for council's consideration.
Thank you. So, and then for community service boards, next priority, one particular bill was SB 590, which would expand the core services provided by community service boards. That bill was continued to the next session. And for the following categories, sovereign immunity was identified as a priority, but there were no specific bills relating to that one. And as for honorary renaming, there were also no specific bills introduced in the legislature to address that issue. Lastly, there was weapons and public safety. While this isn't included in the legislative program explicitly, it is an important priority to the city. And several bills were introduced in this category, so 11 were of interest to the city, and none of them passed. So those bills were relating to controlling the distribution, use, and availability of firearms, and as reiterated before, none of those bills passed.
So as we wrap up, I do want to highlight that the honorary naming of Saigon Boulevard is one that didn't have legislation, but it's been deemed that it is administrative option for City Council in Fairfax County to do. So I believe, yep, Emily is still here. She and I are meeting in 2 weeks, and planning will be working with us for us to coordinate the process for bringing a resolution before council, as well as coordinating with Fairfax County. So we hope that starting in July, and depending on your meeting schedule and workload, we'll be able to bring that forward through the fall. So I wanted to highlight that. And then as we wrap up and open it up for any questions or direction for the next General Assembly, I did want to say thank you to Alex. It was great to have his skill and expertise and research and tracking the bills with me through this next session. Very engaged when we went down to Richmond, and the lead author of the report for you this evening. So thank you, Alex. Mayor?
Great. Well, first of all, Alex, what a really thorough report. So thank you, and really nice work on it. We're so glad that you're now still with us, interning in HHS. So continue keeping up with the good work. Thank you. Let's open to questions and comments. Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to compliment the work of the Legislative Committee. We met several times, but especially the work of Cindy Mester and Alex, who tracked, I think, every one of those 3,000 bills somehow, and focused on the key priorities for the City of Falls Church. And there were some big wins, and I want to thank our legislative delegation and the entire Northern Virginia legislative delegation for the Metro funding that they provided for the 2 fiscal years, and we have the longer term issues to deal with. But it was great to have that progress. And there were a lot of other areas. Clearly, the charter change was significant as well, to give us the ability to open up the ability for more folks to serve on our boards and commissions. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for the hard work that both of you did, and the Legislative Committee for the council for the work that they did as well. Thanks.
Vice Mayor?
At risk of being repetitive, I too want to thank you, Cindy and Alex, for a tremendous amount of work. It's hard to, if you're not doing this every day, it's hard to know just how much work that is when it's peak season. It's 24/7. Things change rapidly. We appreciate how well you kept everybody informed with just the right amount of information to help make some decisions and make some impact from Northern Virginia. So look forward to getting right back at it and going back after several of the areas where we haven't had as much success. Disappointed in 200 plus vetoes, of course, because a lot of those things were things that we held dear. But we'll take the wins, like Mr. Snyder mentioned, on Metro, wins big and smaller, like renaming the honorific of renaming Saigon Boulevard. I also wanted you'd ask for feedback on the council salary. And I've spoken in the past years, I would like to continue to make this role up here available and palatable to as many people as possible. And I do think that an increase in pay or in benefits for people would inspire more people to get involved, and maybe assist for those who might need childcare or elder care to actually fund the ability to come to meetings at night, and or during the day when you have to take vacation to come to a meeting. I think while it seems like a large increase, and it's certainly an expense to the city, it's nominal in terms of hopefully the value that is derived from the work that's done. So just one vote for continuing to pursue that, and we'll get community feedback, of course, and see what our community thinks about that. But again, most importantly, thank you both for your work. Alex, excellent presentation. You have a great future in all kinds of areas, but should you choose to stay on in legislative analysis, we'd be happy to have you around. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ms. Leon?
There was so much in this legislative cycle. The cycle actually kept going and going and going. So yes, to amazing how you track the evolution of this, because it was definitely a windy road, right? So thank you for that. Two things. The first one is I echo what Vice Mayor said, and that I just want to clarify, for council salaries, I know that it was noted that the cap increased to 20,000, but really what's in effect in July 1st is, salaries for council members going from 9,200 to 11,000. It is not the 20,000 cap. And for the mayor, it's 11,500. So I do think that we have a little bit further to go in that space to kind of support encouraging civic participation, in our in this community, in this city. I had one question, Cindy, on this. The reference to several studies that staff will be participating in. Could you give me a little bit more color as to which ones are the ones that are most impactful, or the ones that you're eyeing there that are relevant for us?
Sure. I think in Northern Virginia, it's going to be the data centers. And we just had a really good, robust conversation at the Regional Commission with the Chief Administrator's Office. The data centers are requiring a lot of power and transmission, and so that impacts our region, where they're placed, but also it has a probable secondary impact on our ability to do EV chargers, because you need powers for those and they get prioritized. So I would say data centers for the region. Locally for JLARC, to the City of Falls Church, I think it's the economic development initiatives and incentives to further that. The two that are probably the strongest that I think we need to be very visible in is the Housing Commission related to accessory dwelling units, also the study on using religious properties for affordable housing, because there's a lot of potential there. I think with religious entities needing to maybe have increased revenue, don't need all the parking and land, so there's some opportunities there. And of course, working with Senator Salim on the accessory dwelling units because of his bill last year, and it's coming back in the work that you all are doing. Public Transit Joint Committee on Transit Study, totally critical because it's tied to the WMATA funding. In order to get the WMATA funding, there's this required study, MVTC, PRTC, VRE, all our regional transportation partners are going to be involved. That ties directly to the COG work we're doing. So I think that's very important that we're actively engaged there. And then there's quite a few at line 161 that I'll be working with Department of Human Services on, public safety, because a lot of that co-responder mental health community services board and how to best do that. There's boatload of studies in that arena. So I would say the Housing Commission, transportation, and then we'll be dealing with behavioral and mental health.
Thank you. I think that's a lot to keep track of. That was greater than 5 as we roll into the session for next year. And they're all going to be, which ones are completed? Like, are they going to start? Like, that's an aggressive date to complete it between now and
yeah, they're all
when session
starting
starts.
now and into the fall.
Okay.
And so it will be aggressive, it will be busy. Some things like the data centers aren't scheduled for JLARC till December, so some stuff may not actually result in bills by January, but some bills for that large number of bills, 370 that were carried over, they'll be studied within this formal, or the legislator's going to bring it back. So we'll be working it. So you're right. It continued and continued and continued. It's still continuing. It'll be year-round important work.
Yeah.
And it'll be a collaboration with our various departments that are in the specialty fields.
Looking forward to you sharing those studies. So thank you. That was the questions that I had.
Ms. Connolly?
Just one more thing, and no one has mentioned the charter amendment, and I just would like to compliment my colleagues, especially on ensuring that that charter amendment passed as written, and it's taken a few years, and we had a discussion at some point this year, do we change our approach? And I advocated changing our approach, and my colleagues advocated sticking to our guns, and I am really pleased to say that that worked out, and we were able to change our charter, and that passed. But that's one example of the changing strategies and different people in Richmond and how you can make things work and not. So I want to congratulate everyone on our persistence on that one. And thank you for tracking it. And I know Delegate Simon also was very influential in making sure that passed. So thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, I have a few. I wanted to plus one on the council salaries. I think it's really important in general that anyone who's qualified to run and wants to run and able to run be able to. And I hope that by increasing salaries, we can actually make our council more democratic with better representation and not really rely on people who are independently wealthy or rely on income of a spouse or family members to be able to campaign and represent this community. So I would support looking into that further. A couple pieces of legislation that I would love to actually follow up on code changes. The towing one was quite promising. The fact that it would now require written authorization from the owner of the property, give us more power to regulate monitoring, and then the 10x the times of unlawful towing fees, be able to pay that back to the victim, if I read that correctly. I think those are pretty meaningful, and I think predatory towing is a real thing that we often hear about, and our hands have been really tied in the community. So I would actually recommend accelerating that if possible and adopting an ordinance, assuming that that is something we can do quickly. Does the legislation give us authority that once we pass the ordinance, it can go into effect?
Yes.
Okay, so I would, I guess, advocate to my colleagues. That's something that we have heard so much from over the years, and this is finally one step in that direction, so I would love to see this happen as soon as possible.
I can work with Mr. Shields on that. We have the legal basis. It does have some community engagement requirements. It also has some positive and negative reactions. So I think we'll need to work with CACT, the Chamber, and the Towing Advisory Board.
Great. The second one I picked out, which again has been a top priority that we've heard from people, is around transportation safety. And the one in particular is being able to use automated enforcement on high-risk intersections. So my question, and we don't have to answer it now, is number one, how is that defined? Do we qualify? And then if so, does this give us extra ability to take advantage of that?
And
I'm sorry, I don't have the bill number.
Just for expectations, it probably will not be an impact for the city. I'll need to confirm with the police chief, but I do not believe we have a fatality that happened prior to January 1, 2014.
So did you define high risk as fatality? Because that seems unfortunate.
It's a very narrow definition. It was negotiated to the point that it's...
Yeah, we should all agree that it should not take a fatality for something to be high risk, and which is really unfortunate the way it's defined, but
Yeah.
that's my commentary.
I have a confirmation from the chief before. We do not have a high risk.
Well, that is disappointing, but thank you for looking.
We'll keep working the broader issue.
Great. Tree canopy is another one. I think when I was liaison to urban forestry, that's something that we often wanted more authority to either increase the requirements for it or the funds for it. And I know there were a couple pieces of legislation, so I certainly would be interested in taking advantage of that. The last one is actually not in the report, but I had forwarded over email, was the requirement to stop versus yield in crosswalks, which I think might have been authority we got last year. So if staff could look into that, I forwarded an email about it several weeks ago.
Yeah, that was last year.
Yep. And if, to the extent that that is helpful for us to enforce for pedestrian safety, that certainly seems like something that we should adopt and take advantage of as well. So those are mine. I don't know how my colleagues feel about moving quickly on some of those that I pulled out of the very, very thorough report by Alex and Ms. Mester.
Madam Mayor, if I might, I totally agree with your priorities, and I do want to revisit the electronic speed enforcement for a minute, because there were a lot of bills to authorize much broader use of that. They were all carried over to next year and combined, so my hope is that we can really get some action there next year.
And those are ones that were carried over but haven't been signed to a study or a joint committee, so we'll be having to work with VML, VACO, and the legislators and our public safety associations and advocates.
I just had a quick question. Again, I appreciate your work and kind of your next step of pushing kind of all these bills that did pass and were approved to the appropriate kind of boards and commissions, and working with us to determine next steps. I guess two quick things. I noticed on the VML slide, just to ensure that HHS has this information, there was a bill that was approved, I think it was HB 906 and Senate Bill 480 about residential utility disconnection standards. And so to make sure that the HHS employees have that information in case it affects anyone in the city, they're more, more generous in terms of not disconnecting things, especially around, different weather in relation to extreme heat and extreme cold. And then I did also have a question about the current status of license plate readers. And I know that that was something that had come up in different bills, did not pass in that area, but we retain authority in terms of some authority around license plate readers, and it's more of a staffing potential issue than a authority issue.
That's a good summary. A lot of the license plate reader bills that were being put forward would actually reduce our ability. There is a lot of issues related to staffing, collecting the data, reviewing it, how long you can retain it, and that's what a lot of the bills were.
Okay, got it.
Trying to address.
Thank you.
And if I may, Mayor, I will note that the full legislative report that you all received, as well as the VML report, I've forwarded out to all of our departments and flag key things. And we will also be working with them and the city attorney to bring back in September a more robust list of what things that we might need to change in our city code to reflect mandated state code changes, but also where there's additional local authority that you might consider. We just flagged the current high top ones that were already sort of in your work plan and staff flow.
Makes sense. And I know one thing that was related to infrastructure funding that we talked about was we were pending the $9 million stormwater, and now that that's official, I know that we'll probably have subsequent discussions about sewer funding, et cetera, but wanted to call out that good news that it's official that we are getting a very helpful $9 million infusion from the state on stormwater funding.
Yeah, the money was already appropriated, and as you all know, we had to work through this last session to get the eligibility of projects more flexible. That has been approved. Public Works has already been in contact with DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, because we actually, while it's designated for us, we have to go through the application process. That'll start in August. And then we'll get the flow of money down as reimbursements. And I know Public Works is already looking at which projects that funding would be allocated to. It is appropriated in your CIP, so it can proceed, and further work session discussions will happen.
Great. Oh, Ms. Land, final one.
Yes, final one. Yeah, Cindy, for the HHS sector, there is SB 590, which mandates services to be provided by every community service board. So we've got the Falls Church and Fairfax Community Services Board. I'm curious what the impact is that this legislation has for HHS services that we provide in the city.
One that was continued because it needed more study to look at the impact. It's a positive thing in that more eligible activities would be included as mandated services, and so we would concur those individuals need the services. There will be, of course, the impact of the financial, because oftentimes the bills will get implemented, but we don't have state corresponding increase in funding.
Yeah, that's key.
Now, in this last General Assembly, and I think during the next one, there is general positive support for increased behavioral and mental health services and funding. But as you know, with this last budget, there was quite a bit of negotiation on the tax rate and rebates, and so there was a compromise in terms of the revenue projections at the state level. So we'll need to monitor that going into next General Assembly session, both for this bill and the corresponding budget, which the governor will release in December, and usually in November, they have some state revenue projections. So it's a very positive from a service level. We'll need to make sure the funding is following.
Okay. Interesting to keep track of. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you again for the really good work on this, and we look forward to talking more.
Thank you, council. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, well, let's move on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item, please?
Yes, our first item is a public hearing on TR 24-05, resolution to amend Chapter 3 of the City of Falls Church Comprehensive Plan to add the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District. And I will let everybody know if you would like to speak during the public hearing, if you could fill out one of the purple slips in the back and bring it up here, we will be glad to hear you. Thanks.
Welcome back, Ms. Baysborn.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council. Tonight, City Council is requested to amend Chapter 3 of the Comprehensive Plan, Community Character, Appearance, and Design, to add the Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District. This item is before Council for a public hearing and adoption. Updates to the draft chapter and the staff report since the June 3rd, 2024 City Council work session are highlighted in gray. Staff recommends holding the public hearing and adopting TR 24-05. On May 15th, the Planning Commission held a public hearing for this item. As part of the public hearing, Ed Henderson, president and founder of the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation and vice chair of the Historical Commission, provided public comment in support of the project. Following public comment, the Planning Commission voted unanimously 4-0 to adopt the proposed amendment and recommended that Council grant final approval. A little bit of background. Staff proposes that the legacy of the Tinner Hill community and its ties to the civil rights movement be commemorated through the establishment of an honorific historic and cultural district to be incorporated into the city's comprehensive plan. Moving on to line 25, we get into the Historical Commission request. So back in April of 2023, specifically April 17th, the City of Falls Church's Historical Commission submitted a memo to the City Council regarding establishing a Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District. The memo includes historic background information on Tinner Hill, potential boundaries of the proposed district, and notable sites that could be included. Moving on to line 30 of the staff report. Here we have a comments matrix addressing comments and feedback received in the June 3rd, 2024 City Council work session. Some are related to formatting, some are additional information into the draft chapter. This comments matrix goes into page 3. And a couple of things that were added. So very quickly, we had a request to add the Martin Luther King Jr. Day Walk under the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation celebrations, festivals, and advocacy. This has been incorporated on page 19. We had a request to look into information on Bishop H. Southgate and his relation to the adjacent Southgate neighborhood. We also had a request to add some information on Colonel Crocker and add a reference to history related to Colonel Crocker, and we did this on page 4. Again, a lot of the feedback was related to formatting that can be seen in the table above. I just want to go to page 6 of the staff report really quick, because this is where we can look at the proposed district map. Yeah, and here we have the proposed Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District and the map itself. There's a couple of different sites noted on the map, and I just want to highlight those really quickly. We have Joseph and Mary Tinner's home outline. We have Charles and Mary Elizabeth Tinner's home. We have the Tinner Hill Historic Site and Marker. We have the zigzag sculpture. We have the Tinner Hill Civil Rights Monument. We have the Written in Stone Walking Trail and the Women's History Walking Trail. We have the Harriet Foot Turner land. We have Edwin and Mary Ellen Henderson's home. The future parklet along Wallace Street. The Transit Plaza, the Rolling Road Marker, and then the Galloway United Methodist Church and the Civil War Trail marker there. Now I'd like to move on to page 7 of the staff report, just briefly to look at some public engagement. So this project has been reviewed by the Historical Commission as well as the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. We also took the project before the Economic Development Authority, as well as the Arts and Humanities Council, Planning Commission, and City Council. We've hosted some library pop-ups in collaboration with the Mary Riley Stiles Library back in the spring. We also had an event at the Tinner Hill Historic Site in May, towards the end of May, on May 23rd. We have some photos of that event right here. Now I just want to move on finally to line 298, the timing section of the staff report. And I just want to highlight, again, this project began following a memo submitted by the Historical Commission on April 17th of 2023. City Council reviewed the project for the first time during a kickoff work session on January 16th of 2024. We went through robust public engagement, again, with those boards and commissions noted, and then also hosting some events around the project. And now we're back at City Council tonight for our public hearing and final consideration on June 24th of 2024. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your work on this. Well, let's open up the public hearing before we get to council comments. I know we had a couple of speakers, right?
Yes, we have Edwin Henderson.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Edwin Henderson, founder of the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. I live at 307 South Maple Avenue. And I just want to say thank you for all the people that did a lot of really excellent work on creating this. It's been a real pleasure working with Emily Bazemore and the planning staff and the Historical Commission, which I'm vice chair, working with Ron Anzalone. And I guess it's premature, but I want to say thank you to the council for approving this. But I think that we also have a number of people that, entities involved in this effort. Not least of all is Fairfax County, which I hope will be a more visible partner in the future in future developments and improvements on the historic site and this district, at least the part where they are involved in. As you know, the community is divided through two jurisdictions, and by that means also the historic site as well. And I'd like to thank Dave Snyder when he was mayor and helped to get the land where the historic site is, along with now Congressman Sherry Connolly. And so I want to congratulate Dave on his 30 years in working with City Matters. I'm going to leave it at that, and I look forward to the discussion and the vote on this issue. And I look forward to a more closely working with the city in future developments and programming and things like that we do in the name of Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. One other thing I'd like to say, though, is that one of the things that really brought me to this was the fact that we had wayfinding signs that actually said Tinner Hill Historic and Cultural District already in place along South Washington Street. So it only makes sense to me that we created this district, and I'm happy with the work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Reverend Steve Martin, and followed by Nikki Graves Henderson.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, council, executive leadership. I want to echo what Ed is saying here because it not only makes a moment, but it also creates a moment. One of the things that I spoke about when we were doing the dedication to the mural, where we had Vice Mayor and City Manager speaking, one of the things that we chatted about was that Falls Church, in terms of celebrating the city as it celebrates 75 years of history, community, and friendship. And to be able to do that, organizations such as the Tenniel Heritage Foundation brings that moniker, brings that footprint and that brand to even display that. And if you haven't seen the mural, you need to go see it. Travel down Lee Highway, you cannot miss it. And you will see the history and the diversity that went into making that happen. And that whole project commemorated what it means to have nothing but unity and also cooperation and heart when it comes to passion. So again, history, friendship, community. And I always say it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a community to change the world. And that's what we're trying to do here. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And finally, we have Nikki Graves Henderson.
Good evening. I'm Nikki Graves Henderson. I live at 307 South Maple Avenue here in the city of Falls Church. And I, like the two previous speakers, want to say thank you for all of the hard work by so many people who have put their time into making sure that, and I assume, as my husband assumes, that this will be approved. I think that one of the things that we should not lose sight of, I'm a relative newcomer to Falls Church. I've only been here for 21 years. I've been reminded many times that I'm a newcomer, but when I first came, I was amazed. I'm a museum professional. I've worked in museums all across the country, historic sites, the whole bit. And I was so surprised when I came to Falls Church and saw what you have here. I actually literally walked the streets of South Washington and counted 11 different ethnic restaurants and businesses. I don't think there's any place in the city that can brag about that other than the Tenner Hill Historic and Cultural District. I hope that you will see how much of an advantage we will be to this city. Whenever Ed or I or somebody from Tenner Hill attends statewide, national, university, academic meetings, they are shocked when we tell them about Tenner Hill, what exists. Most of the time, when you go to a historic site or an African-American community, you are met with a sign or a plaque. So to have an intact neighborhood like the Tenner Hill Historic District overlay that straddles Falls Church in Fairfax County, trust me, it's amazing. It truly is amazing. And I expect that your stamp of approval will carry us even further in terms of bringing tourism, dollars, and people into our beautiful city. So again, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Is that it for public comments?
I don't have anybody else signed up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we will close the public hearing and we will move on to council questions and comments. Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I want to recognize Ed and Nikki especially for their leadership to bring this about in so many other ways. And and that they lead our community. Cindy Mester in particular, helped with the acquisition of the property. So many people, city staff and board and commission volunteers. But one of the best things about this is not just history, this is the present and the future. And that center and the area that we've set aside has already served its role of addressing current issues, and I fully expect that it will play that role in the future. So we're talking about history and tourism, that's great, but we're talking about the future, and this effort helps underscore and support that we have a center here that's going to be a living center far into the future. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I feel like this is a culmination of many events that have happened between the music festival and the mural dedication and June 19th. I feel like this is a culmination of a lot of really, really positive energy and recognition of a lot of work and a lot of history by so many people. And it just feels like an honor and a privilege to be able to sit up here and to support this. So thank you very much to everybody who's in the audience who's participated in this process, who's brought the history of their families to us and shared so much history. And like Mr. Snyder said, and we talked about last weekend, and in the present and then hope for the future as well. So thank you all.
Ms. Flynn.
I was also just going to say thank you to the Tinner Hill Foundation, the Historical Commission, the planning staff, everyone else involved in the city, and of course, as the Vice Mayor said, to all the families who shared their histories and who fought the battles in our community to advance social justice, and also did that, often knowing, right, the danger and discomfort to themselves. And so I think as a locality, I feel really proud to be a locality, last week with like the 60th anniversary, right, of Freedom Summer murders. And having Miss Selby here, right, 60 years ago, being the first black student to graduate from our high school. And next week, right, having the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Like, not all localities acknowledge their history and educate the community on it and learn from it. And so I feel really proud to be a part of this and to live in a place where we're doing this and to be able to support you all because you have persevered and really done the hard work that's gotten us here today. So thank you.
Okay. Ms. Connolly, do you have a comment?
Yes, I just want to echo what everyone else has said. I think this will be a really important designation and really shows that our community is much more unified than it was in 1915 and 1887 and in the past. On June 19th at the Juneteenth celebration, I was going to pop in for 15 minutes, say hello and go, and I ended up staying for several hours, and I felt like I was part of a family reunion, and that you all welcomed me to your family reunion. And I think that is so important as well, that we are a welcoming community, and so pleased to be able to recognize the wrongs of the past and right them. And as Mr. Snyder said, this is about the present and the future. So I am so glad everyone is here tonight for this, and looking forward to seeing what happens next, because I do think there will be more murals and more ribbon cuttings and more opportunities to gather and tell stories and educate our community on what was and what can be if everyone works together.
Great. Ms. Underhill.
Just to quickly echo everything everyone said already, I'll keep this short. Thank you to Ed, to Nikki, to Emily for tirelessly listening to all of the feedback and absolutely implementing all the different comments that came your way. There was a lot of celebrations in the past week, or a few weeks, from Tinner Hill Festival to Juneteenth to the mural unveiling. I think the thing that stuck with me the most was during the mural unveiling, the talk about using the past to shape our future. that has stuck with me, and I think this this plan really represents that ethos and message. So thank you.
Great. Well, ditto what everyone else said. I think up here, the seven of us actually have a pretty easy job to adopt a really good plan. So thank you, Ms. Bazemore, for that work. The real hard work has been in the community, and so we see it and we recognize it. I think history is important. I think we often use the phrase, when we know better, we do better, right? And this helps us get there. And so we look forward to the important work to come. I think a plan is only as good as the actions and the prioritization of what we do with it. And so hopefully this is not a plan that sits on a shelf, and we put some serious commitment towards many of the strategies and actions and move this forward. So thank you. Do we have a motion, please?
Motion to adopt TR 24-05.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Vice Mayor on the second. Madam Clerk, can you call roll, please?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Leanne?
Yes.
Ms. Sean Siscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Council.
Congratulations. Before we go, we had an idea where we have so many great folks in the audience. If you would like to celebrate this adoption tonight with us with a photo, we'd welcome you up here. You know, it's a little out of the ordinary, but we would love to commemorate this.
Yeah, Emily, that's right.
We wanted to propose maybe a quick 5-minute recess, if that works for council. Okay, we'll be back at 9:11. Okay. Are we ready to resume?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think after that adoption, we just have the consent item and then items in other business. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so moving on to the consent items. Is there anyone who wants to remove anything from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda. The consent agenda.
Second.
I think that was Ms. Leon on the second. Madam Clerk, can you call roll?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shunsiska?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Great. Let's move on to other business. Mr. Shields, do we want to talk about the contract with the construction for Upper Lincoln Storm Sewer?
I certainly would. If I could just make a comment relating to some of the items that are on consent, I do want to thank the council for the very rigorous and very thoughtful performance evaluation process this year. It is one that I've learned a lot from, and I really appreciate the council's work on that. So just wanted to acknowledge that. This item under other business would be something that might often be found on the consent calendar as well, but it has not been reviewed at work session, so it is here for council review and discussion. What we're asking for is award of a contract in the amount of $545,000 to Sagres Construction Corporation for the Upper Lincoln Avenue Storm Sewer Improvements Project. The Upper Lincoln project is one of the original Big Six stormwater projects. It was identified by the Stormwater Task Force. It addresses the fact that there are no stormwater facilities at all on the upper reaches of Lincoln Avenue, and we've had repetitive flooding in that area as water comes down the hill, jumps the curb, and then does damage on private property. And this would install drop inlets along the street and manage that stormwater and to a much greater extent than it has been in the past. No solution is perfect for stormwater, and with massive events, there still could be flooding, but this will, I think, mitigate the more frequent occurrence of flooding in this area. And so that is the staff report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Ms. Underhill?
I have a more general question, and this might not be something you can answer. It might be for Zach. I completely understand the importance of being responsible to the taxpayer and accepting the lowest bid, but have we run into issues by taking the lowest bid where perhaps corners get cut? I was looking at the bids that were on this, and this bid was fairly below the median amount that had been suggested by other contractors.
So staff is recommending moving forward on this with an IFB process. The key is the quality of the plan set and the quality of the instructions to the bidders. And I think staff views that those were of sufficient quality, and the bidder was well informed in terms of what the requirements are, and we can hold the successful bidder to those requirements in the contract.
Have there been any issues in the past with doing this process that way?
That's a big topic. We do a lot of our projects through IFB. Some of our more complex projects, like the library, is done through a different mechanism because there's so much room for change orders, which can be difficult. This is a pretty straightforward project, and so we think the IFB process is a responsible way to procure this.
Thank you.
Heather? Ms. Flynn?
I just, a request. I know we heard from Ms. Kraft recently on the W&O Trail project, and I think, that just reaffirmed that residents are often supportive of these projects, but still just want the heads up on kind of the timing and understanding what disruptions, that they should anticipate. And so I would just ask, as I know staff will likely do, but to think about those efforts in connection with this project as well, to getting the word out to that neighborhood. And then also kind of envisioning what that 6 months, may look like there. Thanks.
had a broader question. So why does this stretch of Lincoln not have a curb inlets? Like, how was it built that way?
We unfortunately have a good number of streets in the city that don't have drop inlets. And this is one where we've had recurring flooding. But we have a map of all of our facilities, and unfortunately, there are a few stretches in the city where it's just an unusually long distance between drop inlets.
Got it.
And this is one of them.
Is there a standard length that we should be following?
I'm sure there is. I couldn't tell you what that
I just want to make sure that we don't have this issue going forward. I mean, we're not adding new streets, so hopefully we aren't adding,
Right.
but if this is the one, I just thought it's unusual for us to need to rectify this.
Yeah.
So, okay. Do we have a motion then?
Move to authorize the purchasing agent on behalf of the city to award up to $545,000 in a contract with Sagers Construction Corporation for the Upper Lincoln Avenue Storm Sewer Improvements Project. That was long.
Second.
Ms. Connolly in the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Leanne?
Yes.
Ms. Sean Sis-Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
Great. Now I think we move on to the work session part of the agenda on the council priorities and work plan.
All right. Well, thank you. And we're looking forward to tonight's discussion. And I would like to invite Andy Young and Jenny Carroll forward. They're going to walk through the items that we have brought forward on key initiatives over the coming 2 years that are aligned with the council's adopted strategic priorities. That was an action by the council in March of 2024. Tonight, what we're requesting of council is to provide, basically, is this the right stuff? And so we'd like to kind of in a brisk and fairly fast-paced way walk through these initiatives. And so you sort of see the body of work that we're planning for the next 2 years and assess, is this the right stuff? We are very keen on working with the council on a good collaboration. This is, I think, a really important leadership exercise where the governing body has articulated, here are the desired outcomes. Now, what are the practical ways that we can accomplish that? So tonight is overview and discussing sort of the big picture of these initiatives. Then we would like to come back and work session format, going by each of the 5 areas of work, have a deeper dive on those with the frontline staff who will actually be executing these projects with us. So that's the plan. And with that introduction, I will turn it over. I think Andy has the first several. We're going to start with environmental sustainability, and then we'll just go through the list. Before we sort of launch, let me just sort of look at the council and say, is this kind of what you all are expecting, is to do a walkthrough of these? And given that there are 24, we think we can do that, in a manageable time frame. One thing I will note also at the end, under good governance, staff has drafted one potential additional initiative for the council's consideration, but we'll address that after we've gone through what was prepared in the staff report. So, Mr. Young.
Before we start, Wyatt, given that we have 24, I think it would be hard for us to save all of our questions to the end and comment. So maybe we could pause after each one, make sure, for any comments, and then before moving on. Does that sound okay?
All right, so we'll go through environmental sustainability, pause for discussion, and then go to the next one.
To pause at the end of each
of the 5.
Each priority area, not after each 25?
I don't know.
I think each priority area.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Wyatt, for the introduction. Mayor, members of council, appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. So we're going to start off with environmental sustainability. Several of these I think are very familiar to you all. The first one is implementing the Government Operations Energy Action Plan. So this is a plan adopted by council last July. Our lead department on this is the Department of Public Works in close collaboration with the schools. As you all remember from last July, the plan's pretty extensive. There are a lot of items in this. We provided an update to the Environmental Sustainability Council last week on that. But a couple items of note, I think, that are at a higher level that I think you all would be interested in. We've got a green fleet grant we need to execute this year, so we're looking to purchase 10 hybrid and electric vehicles with that grant, as well as installing 8 new electric vehicle charging stations for the city to use. The community center HVAC project will get underway this year and be completed here in FY25. And, from an operations standpoint, we'll be looking to integrate energy efficiency and electrification plans into city and school facility operations. So things like energy audits, HVAC control system and natural gas equipment inventory, some of those items identified in the report. Number 2, on the same theme, so we'll implement the Community Energy Action Plan. So this was a plan adopted by Council in November of 2023. So the lead department for this plan for us is Community Planning and Economic Development Services. We provided again, this report's got a lot of items in it. We provided an update to the Environmental Sustainability Council last week. But a couple highlights for you this evening. We'll continue publishing materials for the one-stop shop. We'll establish and run the commercial energy audit program. Continue work on green building guidelines, including development of a checklist for special exception applications for council to consider. And then continue campaigning for no-cost home energy programs for senior and low to moderate income homes. So I'll turn it over to Jenny for the next one.
So the third initiative is looking at open space acquisition within the city, and also to take a look at funding for that through the CIP as well. Recreation and Parks Department is going to be the lead on that, and they will collaborate with Department of Public Works, CPEDS, and Department of Human Services as well. And this is to develop a plan to be proactive and thoughtful in the acquisition of open space for a variety of reasons, and resulting in a plan that will identify properties and also the funding sources to move forward. And I'll turn it back to Andy.
All right, so number 4, and this one came up, I think, in the legislative discussion earlier this evening, but number 4 is to recommend potential code amendments to increase canopy coverage standards in the city. So this in particular focusing on commercial and multifamily residential development. And so the intent on, Public Works would be the lead in collaboration with CPEDS on this one. But we would draft legislation, I think, conduct an analysis of the potential impacts of this towards the end of this year, and then, follow through with public engagement and City Council final consideration before the end of FY25. And then the last one is number 5 is develop options to pay for solid waste services that incentivize waste reduction and promote equity. So we've had several discussions and actions related to solid waste recently. Concerns have been raised about the equity of our current program being funded out of the base tax rate in the city. And then we've also recently adopted the solid waste management plan, which has identified several steps to encourage more ways to reduce, reuse, and recycle. So the intent of this one is to discuss more at the future work session that I think Wyatt was talking about, but there's 2 potential courses of action that the staff have identified that we'd like to engage with you all on. So the first one involves removing residential solid waste expenses from the city's tax rate and instead charge those residential solid waste customers an annual fee. The second one would be consider implementing a pay-as-you-throw system for residential solid waste customers to further incentivize waste reduction. That one's a little more involved and requires, some more planning and potentially more resources to administer. So that one's more of a longer-term action, but those are 2 steps that we can potentially take. So with that, we'll take your questions on our proposed initiatives on environmental sustainability.
Ms. Underhill.
For the key actions, are those all the actions? So for number 1, that goes over the Government Operations Energy Action Plan. Would that be everything that we would do for the next, 2 years?
Those are intended to be the highlights.
The highlights, okay.
Correct.
So there are other things in the energy action plan that will happen that aren't necessarily covered in here.
Correct. We gave the ESC an update that dives into more of those details last week.
Great, okay. Will there still be a plan this summer for, I guess, mapping out that, all the items in that energy action plan? Or would that be somehow folded into this work plan?
So I think that information's included in the report we provided to the ESC last week, and then we can share with you at the upcoming work session.
Great, okay. Perfect. And then the only other comment I had was on the land acquisition plan. I guess one thing would be actually having setting up some sort of system so we can identify spaces, but then if we, because we already have, there was an open space acquisition plan that, I don't know, just got forgotten about. So actually having some sort of initiative in there of following and tracking and following up on these and making sure that once space does become available, that's something that we can actually jump on. And then the other thing is I'm slightly concerned about siloing it only to open space, because there are other needs like government buildings that we, might, like expanding city space or whatever else. There might be other opportunities besides just open space. And so I'm a little bit wary as boxing it in as only open space. There might be other needs that the city has that this fund should or could be applied to. That's all.
Justine, do you propose it as a just broader, like, property acquisition idea?
Yeah, I still think the focus could be mostly open space, but not boxing it off so that we couldn't have, just going through our small area plans, I saw a lot of opportunity for things that the city envisioned at one point that the city might want to invest in that wasn't just open space. And so I guess having this as a comprehensive look and not just a siloed look is what I would propose.
One thought on that, just a bit of a reaction, and I'll be brief. The problem we're trying to solve is that our plans are pretty broad, and they have lots of pretty broad criteria on where we should look to target open space acquisition, and specific to open park expansion, open space. And the thought is to do a review with the City Council, maybe Planning Commission, to target it down to be a bit more focused, so that if opportunities go up, we can be a little bit more resolute in trying to pursue them, as opposed to when the plan's so broad, you lose some opportunity because you're just not really that focused on it. That was the idea behind this initiative. I will say I think the government buildings piece is a separate track and has a little bit of a different set of concerns. And so I think we, and at least in my mind, they're two separate policy objectives that we would be trying to get with the two.
That's what I was going to say. Just this is in the environmental bucket in my mind. Like, that's why it's green space.
Yeah, I guess.
Buildings would be someplace else in the.
Right. I saw this as potentially being more of a land acquisition. So while it could still be focused primarily, just because we have a category, there are things that can straddle categories. And so, yeah, that's part of the problem of having buckets and saying this can only be one thing, is that it sort of loses flexibility to be include other things. And so this was what I saw as a potential opportunity, but I'm open to other thoughts.
Aaron?
I would respond that I understand the focus area on it, and I appreciate and support kind of that focus area. And it might be that, Justine, that your kind of concern or wanting to also have the focus on government facilities could actually come in action item 22 when they're doing the comp plan update of utilities and facilities chapter. And so it might be that we're able to get that in regardless, but that it will just be in a different kind of area of focus, because we're going to have to look at all of that if that action item is in.
Yeah, that would work. I guess as long as we're watching, it'd be nice to have a set of eyes on, hey, this land is for sale. And it's not a siloed department that's saying, oh, this land is for sale for, and we were interested in it for parks, but nobody's watching it for government buildings. No one's watching it for, maybe we wanted to develop a parking facility or all these other things that we had in the small area plans, that those other things get forgotten. But yeah, that could certainly be part of the utilities.
Debbie?
I kind of wanted to back up to one additional step, or, removed, which is thinking about, as we go through each of these priorities, where we stand with budget that has been requested for this fiscal year. Presumably, when we have goals that say fiscal year 25, we have allocated enough budget for that. Just wondering if any of this, as you guys were going through this and all the staff is working through it, were there areas where you thought, we don't have enough money to do this, or we can't get to it to the year after because we didn't have a fund that addresses that in this fiscal year. So I kind of have that question across all of these, and maybe when we go into more in depth in each of our work sessions, we can just touch on confirming that we have the budget to support it. And of course, I think specifically about the energy action plans and what we went through last week, just making sure that we are funding what we say our priorities are. So I know that's a removal from this one specifically, but it addresses all 5 areas. So what do you guys think?
So it makes sense, and I think that we can dive into that in more detail in the work sessions, where we've identified things that we know would require additional resources. We've flagged them in the staff report that you'll see here, and there isn't that much of that. There's only a couple of them, so we've intentionally tried to engage with departments on what we're proposing to you all tonight, from a standpoint of we think we can resource these things.
So given that there's
Sorry, I missed that. Thank you.
24 items instead of like 70-some items we have, most of these are already things that we can do, we think.
That's correct.
Great. That's good news. Mary Beth?
So my first thought is I really like this public engagement document that you shared as part of the packet, the different levels of what public engagement is. That is so helpful because we often say, oh, get feedback, but that's really helpful to talk about inform, consult, involve, collaborate, or empower. So thank you for including that element in there. Back to the first one, the Government Energy Action Plan. Last month when we were approving the budget amendment, there were questions about why the schools were not getting more electric buses. And one of the suggestions there was that there is we come up with some kind of calculus to be able to say, here's the decision, these are the pluses and minuses for this decision. Do we buy more diesel buses and more electric buses? And what are all the elements in there? That was one of the suggestions. And I think that would be helpful as we look at this Government Energy Action Plan, because sometimes there are trade-offs and decisions, and it sounds good to get more electric buses, but the reality might be that it doesn't make sense to get all electric buses. And I think there'll be other decisions like that coming up too. Another opportunity for geothermal, is that the best decision or not? So it would be great if there was some sort of step-by-step process or rubric that we could look at when we're making those decisions to help make those decisions.
We've started discussions on that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, we're at a staff level trying to work through those decisions prior to, things coming to you all, right? So that, I think we understand, in the case of this particular example, the intent of the energy action plans and what we want to do. We've got to balance kind of availability of, certain vehicles, for example, charging, all those things. And so I think we can work on a better way to communicate some of that thought process that we're working through when we make the recommendations to council on the investments the city should make.
Great, thank you.
Caroline?
Overall question, those dates in parenthetical, how should one view those? As target dates for when they're going to be done or when they're going to start?
So I think the intent is those are target dates when they're going to be done.
Okay. It would be great to see a Gantt chart view of when things hit. So if there's, I know you are thinking about this because I know you guys are project managers, so just being able to look at that and tell a story as to how many per quarter we're aiming to deliver, I think would be really helpful. Because I tried doing it and I stopped because I think you've probably done this at some point. It's just not necessarily this Word document. Okay, thank you.
Understood.
Okay. Aaron?
So I shared Mary Beth's reaction of the benefit of this public participation chart. I really liked it, and I think it will be helpful to our discussions. I couldn't always tell why we fell in one place or the other, but like I didn't take that as our charge for this conversation. But I think that having it in front of us as we do different things and sort of saying on the example techniques, things we'd like to incorporate into decision making will be helpful. You probably saw Urban Forestry Commission submitted a number of kind of comments. Maybe they didn't reach you, maybe they did, on things that they would like to see included. And I guess I would just say under number 4 for the potential code amendments to increase canopy coverage standards. One of the things that I've mentioned before that's again in their requests or commentary is the idea of the tree inventory, because I do think that it makes sense to kind of look at hand in hand with the increased canopy requirement. So I know the urban forestry management plan isn't included here. It may not be something we're able to take on kind of in this cycle, but thinking about, the tree inventory and looking at Vienna's experience of funding that through their ARPA funds and doing the funding with their trees, you can see kind of what a tree inventory looks like and the benefit of, something like that $85,000 to helping think about if you increase canopy coverage, what do you need where, or what sorts of trees do you want to put where in order to create a more healthy kind of canopy throughout the city. So just something to kind of consider there among that action item so that it doesn't feel kind of as bare as it does right now.
I thought we were making progress with including it, but we can take that back. I think the tree inventory requires an investment. So my discussion earlier about what we can afford, that would be, and I think one of the things related to that I've started talking with staff about is you can make an investment, have somebody come in and set you up with a tree inventory, but then you have to have a set of processes that your staff has the bandwidth to follow to be able to keep it up. Because if you don't keep it up on an ongoing basis, then 5 years later it's out of date and you will be back to the next city council to ask for money to do it again. And so that there's a couple things I think we have to think through before at least I would recommend that we do something like that.
No, I get that. And I think that, right now we're like 18 years out of date. So I don't want to get into like the weeds of it, but I think that if it's an action item, and I agree that the action item should be in there because it is something that we should be able to do in terms of looking at the ordinance, it makes sense to also have it like informed and think about what the next steps are that accompany that. So whether it's a conversation that comes up in surplus funds or whatever else in terms of things that might be available that we could budget for that we haven't, I'm putting it out there as a continued consideration in response to the comments. But thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I had a few items. I was going to +1 the Gantt chart suggestion, because as I was going through this, I was like, this former project manager cannot keep this straight in my head, so that would be helpful. I also really like the spectrum of public participation. In fact, I think it was post T-zones and Great Streets, we had kind of processed postmortems. We talked about this because I think not only is it important for council to understand the level of engagement, but for the community. And for both those projects, I think we ran into situations where people thought they were more involved than they were. Or we were too late in the process to actually be involved, and it was really just an informing part in the process. So I do think that beyond using that matrix here, it'd be great to, as we kick off a project with the public, to actually declare early on, like, here's your role in this, here's when you expect to be engaged, and here's how, and here's the level of input, and here's when you get to make that. And after that, the ship has sailed. So I think that's a great tool to use. On the content itself, and this is probably something that Wyatt, maybe you didn't mention in the preamble. So like, this is the change agenda. There's stuff on staff's plate that will continue even outside of this. And so one example is stormwater. Like, we have those big 6 projects, and obviously we have a lot of money allocated to those. That's not reflected on here because those are presumed that are continuing to happen and will happen. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So for anyone paying attention and wondering where did all the stormwater stuff go, that's something that's obviously a big environment priority, but is not new stuff per se.
And with the exception of the item or two I mentioned with the Government Operations Energy Action Plan, we've tried to keep CIP projects out of the, what's before you this evening. There's a separate process and update that'll come to council on the portfolio of work that the city's working on there.
Great. But on that stormwater topic, one thing that we talked about early on is not only do we need to have gray infrastructure, but we should try to address the source of the flooding in neighborhoods often, which is upstream. And so I think there were two prongs that we had talked about in the previous work plan. One, which is, should we have a more stringent stormwater requirement in single-family redevelopment neighborhoods? Because that's where a lot of the source of flooding happens. It's not necessarily in our mixed use, because in mixed use, we can actually require extra stormwater retention. And then the second is interaction with trees. I think in the past, we've lobbied the General Assembly on whether trees can be a best practice for absorbing more stormwater, and it's been tricky. I don't know whether staff's thinking on that has evolved, but outside of the gray infrastructure projects, I guess I just didn't want to lose sight of those two kind of ideas to address stormwater upstream to bigger pipes. So that's one. I'll pause there for any, I don't know whether it's been discussed or whether it's, I want to say one or two of those were on the previous work plan, which is why I bring them up.
So in terms of a change agenda on that, I don't know that we have a policy that we're trying to wrestle with in terms of green infrastructure, because we view adopted policies as already embracing those strategies and techniques. So I think that's my initial response to that. In terms of trying to change that, one thing the council, I think, is aware of just in terms of what's coming up, we do have a stormwater code amendment that's coming to you, which we're viewing as a state code true-up, as opposed to a big policy change on how we handle stormwater. But we know from our experience of taking items like this through the community that these bigger questions are likely to come up. And I think a lot of our responses are going to be, we have to comply with state law, and we're pretty limited in terms of what we can do in terms of addressing those types of ambitions in our stormwater ordinance. So that's an initial response to that point. I don't know, Andy, if you have more to add.
No, this isn't something we've specifically talked a ton about over the last month. So
yeah, because I know we've been so focused on implementing the projects. I just didn't want to forget that we did at some point talk about upstream. Let's make sure that our policy is as good as it should be. For example, I think Arlington adopted a 3-inch storm water requirement that I think we considered at some point, because we're like, I wonder if that has merit. Should we adopt the same thing to prevent more runoff from happening? I don't know whether we had done that evaluation of whether it was good or bad, or I just didn't want to lose sight of it and only expand our pipes when upstream we really should try to tackle some of that flooding issue too. So I guess my request there is if staff could just give that some thought, decide whether we think our policy is good enough for now and we don't have the ability to take on more, but I did want to just be more thoughtful about stormwater and not lose it just because we're implementing a bunch of big pipes projects.
Understood.
Great. Another item, which I've talked about in the past, and I don't need this to be on there, but I hope that my colleagues will embrace this, is really leading by example on a couple of fronts. So getting rid of single-use plastics while we're in City Hall. I know that we've encouraged people to move to electric lawn equipment. And so to the extent that as our contracts come up in city properties, I would love for us to do that. Again, I don't know whether it rises to council priority, but those are things that are very much controlled by us. So I'll mention them again. Okay. Any other items on environment? Dave?
Just had two additional comments. As you walk around the city, a lot of the city is paved with impervious surface, right? So in the long term, is there a different way, or are there programs where we can work with businesses to provide the parking that they need and then return some of this paved-over surface to open space. And I think the issue of open space is going to loom larger and larger. The more people we have here in multifamily buildings, the more the demand for open space will increase. And I think we've been pretty good. I think some of the best things that have occurred here has been our acquisition of like the Streambed Park. Now, Wyatt, you were very much involved in that. The purchase of the property across from the Oak Street School. Those are, at least within our 2 square miles, those are big acquisitions. And I think we really need to keep an eye out for that, but also how we, whether you call them parklets or what you call it, that we begin to try to look at ways to reverse paving over everything and returning some of that. And that's nothing that can be resolved in a minute or even in a year, but it's just a thought. The other thought I had was on the solid waste. Just a word of caution, don't do something that will be perceived as taking away a service and the tax rate remains the same or continues to increase. So whatever we do, let's be mindful that we don't create a backlash that would be avoidable at what we're trying to do in terms of solid waste. Just a couple comments, thanks.
I just wanted to plus one, the comment about empty parking lots that could be places for trees and other open space.
Okay. Ready to move on to bucket 2?
Okay, so.
I know you asked us for what can come off and what should we add. I don't think we've actually told you anything that come off in this bucket, so is that correct? Okay.
So for transportation, I'm going to turn to Cindy Mester, who's going to lead us off.
Thank you, Andy. So the first one is addressing your federal, regional, and state long-term funding for WMATA, which of course we talked about during the legislative piece as well. This is in the transportation bucket, but it obviously is moving people, multi-modes, hence is economic development and can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so it crosses a lot of positive outcomes. Right now, we're proposing that I would serve as the lead on this with the focus on legislation and the transportation work we're doing, but it's in collaboration with CPED's Finance and Public Works, of course. 2 main buckets of key actions. One is participate in the COG WMATA task force that we referenced earlier. That's been officially branded as DMV Moves, so you'll see that in a lot of their messaging as well as the documents coming out. Council does not have a representative on the task force, but you do have 2 on the governmental partnership advisory. Now, with Mr. Shields and myself on that. So we'll be very engaged in that as a key activity. Also, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory, TESDAC, which is through state funding, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And within that, there's a lot of sub-staff work because we're needing to do a lot of funding and program design work with WMATA because you need money, but you also need to be more efficient and change their operating. It's a two-pronged big approach. And as I mentioned, you also have the state study that came out of the General Assembly. And then all of that will need to tie into what might be Council's legislative program going into 2025. Some of this work will not be done by then, so we'll probably have to be looking at phased or interim what we're advocating for as the studies do. So that's a highlight of the Metro funding, focused predominantly on WMATA, but some of this is going to be with our other regional operating transit systems as well.
Thank you, Cindy. Number 7 is a familiar one to everybody, completing the bicycle master plan, which will include developing and adopting safe routes to school for biking to the Mary Ellen Henderson Meridian campus. So CPEDS has been our lead on this effort. We have community meetings we talked about earlier this evening, ongoing this week on West Street. So Our intent is to revise the draft report based on the community feedback that we've gotten through these sessions in the first quarter and bring something to council for final consideration in the second quarter, and then work into the CIP and potential budget amendments, ways to fund the implementation for the plans for the priority routes. So number 8 is to complete the Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan. So this was an effort funded by council with the budget amendment back in the fall of 2023. We have a contract awarded and had a kickoff meeting last week. This is a federally mandated requirement by Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act that was last updated by the city in 2014. The updated transition plan will identify a list of physical obstacles in buildings, parking lots, parks, and pedestrian infrastructure, as well as a detailed plan to make those facilities accessible. And this effort's focused strictly on our existing infrastructure. So Public Works is our lead on this one. And the intent is to do, initial evaluation and public outreach through the first half of the year, drafting the plan in the third quarter, and get board and commission and city council feedback and final consideration in the fourth quarter of FY25. Number 9 is to embrace the principles of Complete Streets and Vision Zero. So rather than stand up new programs, city staff is proposing to embrace the program principles in the execution of planned transportation projects through the following actions. So with Public Works as our lead, we would draft a resolution for council adoption to follow the principles of Complete Streets and Vision Zero in future city transportation projects. We'd support staff development via continuing education on these 2 strategies throughout the 2 fiscal years. Integrate key design features into a new public facilities manual for the city in FY26. This would be a new investment. The Public Facilities Manual is a document that provides kind of a wide range of standards for projects, both city projects and developers to follow, incorporating a lot of everything where we interact. So the Complete Streets and Vision Zero elements would be just kind of one facet of that. And then finally, advocate for increased local authority for photo speed enforcement, red light enforcement, and stronger requirement to yield to pedestrians. And then finally, the last one on our transportation bucket is to implement adjustments to streetscape standards through engineering and administrative solutions. So we've talked, I think we've heard kind of over the last year about brick crosswalks and brick sidewalks. So this is kind of our plan on how we would address those, to both address maintenance costs as well as maintaining the city's sense of place and character. And so the plan is to tackle, or look at brick crosswalks in FY25. So we'd pilot an alternative solution, document the pros and cons and costs and how that worked out. And then if it was deemed successful, we'd issue an administrative memo to document that change to our standards. And then similarly, if we're successful with that, we would tackle brick sidewalks in FY26. So, identify a pilot solution, test it out in the city, and then move to an administrative memo to document the change. So with that, we'll take your feedback and questions on transportation.
Mary Beth?
Mine is a timing question on number 10. Can we flip that and do brick sidewalks first and crosswalks second? My concern is that in, for example, the Quinns project, what we said was they had to follow the existing streetscape sidewalks. So if our existing streetscape sidewalks are brick outside of Quinns and we haven't changed that yet, then that is where they will end up. So I would prefer if we could do sidewalks first. I'm sure there are logistical reasons why it might be easier to do crosswalks first. We already actually have a pilot right now with the W&OD crossings that are a different kind of material, and that may be why that comes first. But that would be my main request, is could we do sidewalks before crosswalks?
So I think we can take that back to the team. I think, there's several things kind of in the works and kind of cooking right now that have led us to this recommendation, right? So, but we can take it back and see what the team thinks.
My concern also just centers around the fact that the what we've heard from people about the dangers, they're much more worried about sidewalks than crosswalks. Outside of buildings, we haven't heard as much about concerns about safety of crosswalks for the material. Yeah, other safety concerns on crosswalks, but the material has been more sidewalks.
I think part of the driver on the crosswalks is the cost, right? Both for us to maintain and replace the ones we have, as well as install new ones, and that's one of the other considerations we're grappling with.
Justine?
For the bike master plan, it goes through, let me just pull this up, Q3 of 2025, and it specifically mentions East, West, and West Street. Would that be the conclusion of the bike master plan, or would we still continue to pursue the other streets that were priority streets beyond that, and it's just not listed here?
So we would be opportunistic with the other streets that are laid out in the bike master plan. We probably are maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, that we think that the ones that are listed here are the ones of the highest probability of success and implementation over the 2-year period. But if for some reason those can't advance, then I think we would be looking at the others to say, are there opportunities there? But in the 2-year period, we think these are the ones that have the greatest opportunity for success. That's our read of the situation.
But I guess maybe you can help me with this. Q3 of 2025 in real terms would be next March, correct? And so beyond next March, would we just stop there, or would we continue to, let's say that moves forward in some shape or another, would we then look to the other streets that were priority streets beyond that? I'm just wondering, this seems to cut off in Q3 of 2025.
I see what you're saying. I think we would want to continue. Andy, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can look at that, right? I think the trick, is going to be to advance a couple of these towards kind of implementation and show some success, and I think that can help in the, community engagement for the next kind of round of locations. But I think we can take that back and look at it.
Okay. Yeah, my general concern is I don't want the 2-year plan to say, oh, we're just doing these 3 streets, and then because we didn't mark it, that we might want to do other streets beyond Q3 of 2025, that nothing happens for the remainder of the time. Other things. During the budget process, I remember that DPW had talked about a missing links plan, and that would be something that we would have to fund through additional staff. If we were to fund that, let's say next year, but it's not in the work plan, would that mean that something like a missing links plan wouldn't be able to move forward, or how could that fit into this?
I don't think it's meant to be exclusive, right? So if it's not included here, it doesn't mean staff or council can't propose kind of staffing or funding additional actions in next year's budget.
Okay, thank you. I guess the other thing is LPI, so leading pedestrian intervals and beg buttons. It wasn't specifically included in here, and that's something that I want to make sure doesn't suddenly, just fly off of the radar and is still a priority. And so whether that's something that can continue to happen without it necessarily rising to the level of the work plan is something that I don't know if you can answer that, or Zach would be better to address that.
We've talked about providing council a kind of more comprehensive update of LPIs and big buttons in the city, and but we didn't include it here. It doesn't mean we can't do that or aren't intending to do that, but
yeah,
we didn't include
that's
it here.
helpful for me to know as I was going through this. I was like, oh my gosh, what about this or what about that? If that's already something that is top on the mind of Zach, DPW, then that's fine. That doesn't have to be here. But I just want to make sure that wasn't just forgotten. Other things, what would be involved in a public facilities manual? Would that include things like residential sidewalk standards and shy zones from the sidewalk? Or what sort of things would that include?
So, to my understanding, a lot of jurisdictions have a public facilities manual. It's like a comprehensive list of all of the things that developers or, project teams in the city need to follow on doing a project. Things on, sidewalk standards, for example, and we have a lot of that information in a lot of different places. And for certain things, we refer to Arlington standards and the like. And so to try and kind of make it easier for everybody to understand, including our own staff, I think our team would like to kind of implement a public facilities manual for the city to kind of make business easier for everybody, right? And so I think including it here, provides us an opportunity to, I think, integrate some of the things we're talking about with Complete Streets and Vision Zero. It also helps us solve some other things as well.
Gotcha. I saw that, so that was there was a line item there that's $100,000 to do the public facilities manual. Could it be a similar thing like how we're adopting Vision Zero by maybe taking some principles that we use Arlington's plan for the public facilities manual as a base, or a local jurisdiction's manual as a base?
That's exactly what we're hoping to do, and that's why it only costs $100,000.
Perfect. Thank you. That's good to know. I guess an outstanding question, but this can be, is whether residential sidewalk standards would be included in that, but that can be something that we dig into later on. The final thing I have on this is the big thing that I felt was missing from this that I would like to add in, especially because we have a growing population and micro-mobility is incredibly important, and it would just crush me if it took us more than 2 years to adopt a car share or scooter share or golf cart share plan that Arlington and our other local jurisdictions already have. And so I have suggestions of things to remove, but I almost don't even want to say what to remove. I just want to throw it out there that I really do think that a micromobility plan, that's something that the Planning Commission had asked for, and it's also something that I feel pretty strongly about including in our 2-year work plan.
Erin?
I just wanted to ask if there's a way maybe that since there's, I don't remember what it was, something like $250,000 going towards the ADA transition plan, and then this $100,000 towards the public facilities manual, is there anything that we can sort of glean from doing the ADA transition plan where we're paying to sort of have consultants hopefully taking a more holistic view, but also focused view of needs that we have throughout the city that can then inform this public facilities manual or, other things we should be doing in terms of implementing safety features and mobility kind of for all modes in the Complete Streets Vision Zero. So I'm just asking if there are ways or to think about kind of in that fiscal year 25 in the ADA plan, if there are things that dovetail from that into like Complete Streets and Vision Zero and accessibility issues that also go with safety issues that can help inform like this fiscal year 2026 plan and build off of it, and that it just isn't like we finish it and it kind of is shelved or it's not helping to inform the next like consultancy or whatever that's happening under Vision Zero. So just food for thought.
I understand. Okay.
Other comments on transportation? Dave?
Just two. Councilmember Underhill's comments about micro-mobility is something that I think needs to be, at least in our peripheral vision, and we should be thinking about what's out there that we could use as a model so that we don't have to literally reinvent the wheels, if you will. And then just make sure that we're going to be able to adequately staff the Route 7 bus rapid transit for a project as it continues to move forward.
I have some. I will plus one on the micromobility one. I think it would be short-sighted for us not to think about that. On bike, I think I said before that I would love to see the schools route take first priority. So if, to the extent possible, if it is a budget amendment, because it looks like it's not funded until Q3 FY25, I do think that it's important to get a win early on, and that hopefully is the most viable option. So I will say that again in terms of implementation timelines. On the ADA plan, I again went back to my old notes. At one point, we talked about adopting universal design standards as kind of ADA being the bare minimum, and then could we go beyond that? And actually, I know Dave Charter was a big fan of that. So if we are bringing in a consultant to update this federally required plan, I guess I would ask our consultants whether there's more that we should do beyond the ADA bare minimum as part of that scope. Actually, for the record, Justine said LPIs before me in this meeting, so I wanted that noted. So I will support LPIs, beg buttons, and also no turn on red as part of our Vision Zero plan. I think those are very clear principles as part of the Vision Zero plan on improving pedestrian safety. So hopefully, as I think the language is embrace the principles of Vision Zero and complete streets, we will look more seriously at implementing those three tactics across the city. My last thing, missing links, the kind of master sidewalk list and kind of a sidewalk program. Is that also part of Complete Streets and Vision Zero, or where does that kind of sidewalk effort live?
Well, I owe you 2 sidewalk lists by the end of the summer, but we weren't incorporating that into this plan, these 24 things.
I guess the question is, once we have the list, hopefully we're doing something with the list, right? So not only do we know where the missing links are, where do we need to repair sidewalks, add sidewalks, but what are we going to do with it?
So we're going to use that to prioritize our sidewalk program through the CIP and through our normal budgeting process. So I think, from our perspective, we know that the council, through all of its other policy levers, is, very strong on increasing walkability and safety on our public rights of way. And so that change agenda is embraced, it's in place, and now that plan is an execution form of that, but I don't think it's going to require a huge amount of effort by the city council to keep pushing on that.
Great.
That was our thought process on it.
That's terrific. I mean, I don't need it to live there as long as I know that the work is happening and we're going to get the list and we're going to start seeing sidewalks get done. I think that's ultimately what the community cares about. So thank you.
Maybe one other thought, the Complete Streets and Vision Zero did come out of this discussion about LPIs and, how we treat intersections. And it does, the council's signal on this is really important. And I think Zach has mentioned this. 10 years ago, it was never expressly stated, but the council's feedback was always about vehicular throughput. And so we tended to embrace that in the way that we thought about signal timing. And in recent years, the council has been pedestrian safety is the top priority. So that's caused a shift that is being carried out. But this policy statement then, I think, accelerates that work, sort of formalizes it, and then goes into our design specs as we go forward. So as we implement the Smart Cities grant, where we're going to be updating our signal technology across the city, this policy statement helps then inform how we spec that. So that's the tie-in, and we think that's a great policy work by the council. We're hoping it's not sort of arguing over intersection by intersection, but sort of really more at the policy level.
And if I could just add, for the future work session, the LPI, I think your point of Smart City is right on target. We had a meeting today, as I mentioned earlier, and we actually have several of the new traffic signal boxes installed. Save the date, August 12th, we're going to unveil one. But that conversation with Mr. Bradley and VTI was all about LPI signalization and bringing some more messaging to council in the fall as it deploys. So I think it is infused in the culture now. Pedestrian first, vehicle second.
Great. Well, signal optimization was on my list too, so thank you for covering that.
That's part of it.
Great. Okay. Any final thoughts on transportation? let's move on to number 3.
So number 3 is economic development, and the first two I'm going to take. And they are related, so I will probably talk about them together. They are both updating processes, one with the permits process and then the other one with payments. So with the permits process, what we're looking towards is ultimately having a permits process that is responsive and improves the customer experience for the community, vendors, and staff. Technology will play a big role in including leveraging the current enterprise resource planning system, also known as EERP, also known as Munis, and the website to improve process and access. And that is also true for the payments process, and looking towards a payment process that is more convenient and accessible to customers, and improving the staff side and experience to administer the payments process. This is also tied into EERP, AKA Munis, as well. So both of these follow a similar plan, and the lead department for this is the city manager's office. And then a couple different departments involved as well to collaborate with. But both of them follow developing a project plan and then looking at our technology, the website, and then also looking for feedback from not only the, I'm used to calling them patrons, not only customers and community residents, their feedback, but also the feedback from staff who use the systems as well. And then I'll turn it over to Andy.
All right, so number 13 is complete and maintain city features that deliver an attractive sense of place. And so we've got a number of these efforts kind of ongoing. We pulled off flower baskets and gateway plantings this year. We need to get into an annual rhythm with that. We need to complete the construction of 3 parklets. So I believe we're awarding the Maple Avenue contract this week. We'll bring the Triangle Park contract authorization to you all in July. And we'll get the Tinner Hill parklet contract awarded before the end of the fiscal year. Public art wraps for utility boxes, and then we've talked about, getting into an annual rhythm of soliciting input from staff and select boards and commissions on new options for additional sense of place features in the city. And so we would propose to kind of work that into the FY26 budget process. Number 14 is develop a plan for the Gordon Road Triangle that includes a long-term solution for the city's property yard. So we've talked about this a good bit during the budget process. The city has applied for an Urban Land Institute Technical Assistance Panel grant with COG. And then at the end of that, so that's the first step. And at the end of that, we would spend FY26 focusing on updates to the West End area plan and associated future land use map to support the outcomes of the TAP study. And finally, on number 15, so provide parking requirement relief for existing commercial buildings. So this is an effort ongoing with CPEDS at the moment. But relieving off-street parking requirements encourages new businesses to operate within existing buildings by lowering renovation costs and preserves the architectural character of the existing buildings and community. So if everything's on track, this one will wrap up pretty soon and it'll come to you all for final consideration in August. So with that, we'll take questions on economic development.
Caroline?
Thank you. So starting with number 11, Jenny, can you help me understand, are we implementing anything? When you say explore, it's not as strong as implement, so I'm unclear on what explore means and the distinction between implementing a solution.
So we have a current system that we use behind the scenes, and that's Munis, what everybody's familiar with. There are other options out there, and so technology options, both for the permits process and for payments processing as well. So taking a look at what might be out there, but also looking at what we currently are using and if that is what we want to continue to utilize. And so then either implement on the Munis front or implement if there's something else, or if there are additional technologies that add to what Munis has as well.
Okay, so this is good. So you're open to saying, okay, we got something. Let's do some market research to see if there's something better.
Correct.
And you're going to make a decision some point after 3Q FY 2025 and then implement after 25.
More than likely.
Yeah. Is the intention on some of this to, you know, at the end of 25, recast this plan and think about what we're doing in 26, so we're not hanging on some things where we know you naturally need to take more next steps, like in this particular one, you already know what the path is, but we kind of just stopped at, you know, exploring technology options versus implementing.
Yeah, so these are, for both of these are just the initial steps for the key actions. There will more than likely before FY 26,
Part 2.
be part 2, yes.
Okay.
So these are two areas where I feel like I have just, it still feels like I've just barely scratched the surface of Munis. And so it's been quite an assessment process in looking at Munis.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And when we, thank you, question 12, for 12, question here is update the payments process. Like, are we thinking a different third-party provider? You know, JP Morgan Chase is a very commonly used platform. They use Paymentus. So what is the scope of that one? Because we have a payments platform. Is it an integration with something else, or what are we?
I think it's more looking at integration and what Munis has to offer and whether or not we can leverage what Munis is offering in terms of how we process payments.
Got it.
So it's, at this point, it's more exploration.
Yeah, okay, I hear you on that one. And remind me, when we process payments, we allow ACH and credit card right now, right? Right, last I checked, okay. For the number 13, nothing against completing and maintaining flower baskets and gateway plantings on an annual basis. That's not considered a baseline activity? That has to be a project?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment on that one. That's not a heavy lift for the council. Council's already sent that signal, and now we've executed.
We did expand, right, to South Washington.
We did, so we're down on South Washington. And
Wait, so is the point on this one continue the footprint or expand where we complete and maintain flower baskets and gateway plantings?
So I think the idea behind the last bullet was, you know, so we've got a baseline, you know, we've got some projects we started to finish, and then, you know, this has come up with, I think, council, but also the EDA, that, you know, this sense of place in the city and an attractive sense of place is important. And so establishing an annual process where we talk about what's next, right?
Yeah.
Is it more flower baskets on another street? Is it sculptures, you know, in some of our parklets or parks, you know, and having an engagement process with the public and our staff to come up with some ideas and bring that to council for consideration.
Okay. So just so that I understand, are we taking that one off? The complete and maintain flower baskets, because we know it's just like.
We can take that off.
Okay.
Yep.
Before we take it off, though, sorry if I'm jumping in. We have a banner program. I don't know if we have a banner strategy as a way to promote economic development or communicate things going on in the city. Like, we know we do one for graduation. We have kind of somewhat perennial ones for farmers market and things, but I don't know whether, and welcome Mary Catherine to the meeting. I don't know where that lives, or if that's an opportunity to leverage our banner strategy, leverage our banners more as a strategy, and be more organized about what goes
it
up
has lived traditionally in OCOM.
Okay. I throw that in there because to me it's like it's definitely adds a sense of place. It's a marketing and communication opportunity for us.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, Mary Beth.
And also, I don't see it specifically called out in here, but one of the things that EDA said was their top priority was all all those little things that need to get fixed to make a street look better, little, and they were small things, but, you trip over the same crack in the sidewalk, or there's the same spot that the dirt collects or something like that, and then adding flower baskets and banners. So that was one of the EDA's top priorities. So I think putting extra effort into that and keeping it in the plan is important, even though it just seems like flower baskets. And I drove down Hillwood today, and it looks so nice coming up past the Transit Plaza with the flowers and the light posts and the trees are there. And it's this thing that we have talked about, and that used to be so ugly, and it really looks nice. So I'm okay with keeping that on there a little bit longer.
That's a good call out. Okay, so 414, I'm just, the Gordon Road triangle in the city's property yard. Just pausing there on whether it's appropriate that the public engagement level is only consult versus inform. Yeah, for something that big, I was withholding from using all the verbs. So I just question whether it's only one verb. I'll let you guys decide, but that kind of gives me a little bit of angst that it's just one verb versus something as big as that, not a multi-verb engagement approach. Thoughts on that one?
So I think when you look at the spectrum, my understanding of this was that it's progressive. So like if you're in consult, it would include inform. Is that what you're talking about? That it includes both? Or higher than consult?
Yeah.
Because inform is the first level and consult is the second level, and then involve.
Yes, so I don't know if it's consult. I think you want to involve. Oh, great. Thanks, Letty. Yeah.
Go back and look at that one.
Yes.
I was going to say, I was going to jump in too. I think we're on the same wavelength here with some of these, because I even had consult and then the arrow over to empower, because I think ultimately, right, I mean, this is going to be a referendum. And so I think we need to add in at the empower and the empower column. And so I sort of feel the same way as Caroline, and that's what I was getting at earlier, some of the public engagement levels, like this one also to me feels too low on the public engagement level, given the level of input I think we want, the level of input I think the community needs to have in this, and the buy-in that we're going to need overall in something that's going to a referendum at the amount that we're talking about.
And I think we're missing some key actions. This one's a little short on bullets. I would just caution us here to really add, a little bit more clarity for the public in what we intend to do and accomplish here in 25 and 26, just given the size and the attention this one will have. If you would,
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah. I think I'll pause for now and let others speak.
So I really like the under 13, the soliciting ideas for sense of space or place. Something that was missing to me overall, and something that I've been advocating for, is coming up with a community plan for what sorts of things we want to see in the city. And I'm going to bring up my tool library, but things that like we might want to advocate for inside of new development projects. And so I would like to propose under 13, maybe it's somehow tied into the soliciting ideas from staff and boards, not just things for sense of place, but things for sense of city Maybe it's we want to advocate for a food hall in a new development, but it's a way to get people thinking creatively about the future and envisioning the future of our city beyond just flower baskets. The other comment I have is I am the liaison to the Architectural Advisory Board, and the number one thing they asked for, or they have been asking for, is to update our 2001 design guidelines. And that also kind of goes hand in hand with envisioning the city. What do we want the city to look like in the future? And so that was notably missing. Again, I can make some suggestions for things to pull off, but I would be interested to hear other council members' thoughts or feedback on that.
Dave?
I really like the direction that Councilmember Underhill is going, that we should sort of be intentional about what we're looking for and what are the components that we want to see in future developments. And I think that's where you're going with that. So, as Mayor Tartar always used to say, we wanted a grocery store, and we got the Harris Teeter. Well, what is it that we want to negotiate in the future? And it could be occupancies, VCs, whatever, but it might be useful to sort of, because we've had some major successes, some maybe not so major successes, but regardless of that, what do we sort of want to engage the community in terms of what our priorities are now?
Any other items? Okay, I have some. So I would like to keep 13, mainly because as it stands right now, it's complete and maintain. And just like with holiday lights, where we finally expanded all the way to Haycock, is there opportunity to actually expand all those other beautification things as well? So that's a question. I know that as we think about our commercial corridors beyond just Broad Street, like North and South Washington, could be opportunities to think about making those tie in with the rest of our areas as well. So not just complete and maintain for me, it's expand. I had jotted the same item down as what Justine mentioned around kind of desired uses. It's clearly not office, given 20% vacancies elsewhere in office, but what are those desired uses? And I thought the EDO had a study underway or a consultant engagement on this one, so maybe it's already happening and it's just part of the 80% of the business as usual work that's not captured here. But I think there is desire to talk about what are our preferred uses in this kind of post-COVID world. Shared parking fell off the list. So the only thing that's on parking right now is reducing parking requirements. So I guess I would like to understand, is there an opportunity to still promote shared parking and use the existing parking better rather than try to... I mean, we also have several garages opening up with additional public parking. So if we could encourage our commercial neighbors to use those spaces more effectively, it'd be nice to not just ask people to... Anyway, so that just fell off. So I thought that was something that's always been important to this council, is promote shared parking.
Was that wasn't part of the EDA's work plan?
Well, I guess that's the question, right? Like if it's on a...
I feel like it's in, that's where we last discussed it.
Well, does it need to be on the council work plan too, or not? Is there a role for us to do anything about it, or do we just expect the board to take it on?
That's a good question.
Well, it has been on council work plans in the past, and it's not really advanced. I mean, I know you did a lot of work on it just to talk with business owners. I think it didn't make it on the plan this year from a staff's perspective, as we didn't know exactly, what the commitment was. And so we were trying to avoid things that were on there that when you talk about them, like, yeah, that'd be a great thing to do, but then, what then?
One is, for example, like the Kaiser agreement. Let's keep that going. We've got a really great thing. George Mason Square is another one where we actually have a shared parking arrangement. We just need better signage, so we probably just need to tell people about it and do a better job telling people that you can use this garage. 3, I think we have the new 64 spaces opening at the Insight Garage. We still have a whole bunch of shared spaces, I think, in the 100 block of Park Avenue. I think we've improved signage, but we had talked about looking into liability insurance coverage to help, because often the barrier for property owners sharing spaces is they didn't want people going across their lot and worrying that someone will fall and it'll be a liability issue for them. So I think Cindy years ago had looked into liability and whether the city's liability insurance could extend to kind of remove that barrier for people to share their parking. So there's a whole bunch of different ideas. I know we may not be able to get to all of them, but at the minimum, it feels like we should at least extend the agreements we have with garages and whatnot and keep promoting it.
So we're prepared to do that. We value those agreements very highly. But, is that a new thing? Is that a change agenda?
Yeah. As long as it's on somebody's plan to do. But I think as a policy, I think this is an item that council still believes is important rather than add new parking everywhere. I think promoting shared parking is a much better use of our land and better for the environment. So. I heard Caroline suggested adding it. Aaron agrees. Okay.
If we add it, does that mean we need to take something off?
We're still way below 70 items.
So we can take it back and look at number 15 and how to maybe reframe that to include, that one's the way we've kind of teed it up is
Like if that one's
hopefully pretty short so we can kind of look at, I think I share Wyatt's thoughts on I don't want to put stuff on here where we're not sure what we're going to do, right? I think we've tried to I think we've heard from you all, we want a plan and we want you all to get the plan done, right? And so I think we need to probably take that back and do a little more homework about what is it that we could do that's specific enough to get at what you're looking for.
And again, if the EDA and EDO are working on it, it may not need to live here. I would hate to lose sight of that. So.
Understood.
I also think it's good because you've already completed 2 of the 4 things that are on there, so give it a little bit more oomph.
I did have a quick comment on a different topic. The EDO is looking at uses, ground floor uses, but that's more in terms of changing our zoning code to maybe allow a car showroom that we don't currently allow. But at least what I'm proposing is for citizens to think more creatively about things that we'd like to see. That might not be a change in the zoning code, but things that currently don't exist in the city that we would like to have here.
We have an EDC meeting tomorrow. We can bring this up with EDC or EDO staff also just to see. We can further that discussion tomorrow.
Okay. Moving on to housing.
Yes, so housing. The first one under that particular priority is preserve the affordable housing for no net loss of units in the city. And so this is taking a look at certain properties that have tax credits that are expiring in the near future. And our goal is to have a plan in place to engage with property owners on preserving affordability. And that is starting in the first quarter of the new fiscal year, the first and second quarter for that particular initiative. The second one, number 17, is addresses the 99 new affordable dwelling units that will be going online on 3 properties and throughout the city. And those will come online staggered over the next 6 months. So that 3 months there, I think that was in the first sentence, it's actually in the next 6 months. In 3 different properties, as I said. The Department of Human Services will be placing eligible applicants in those units. And just as a note, it usually requires 3 applicants to place an eligible person. So they need roughly 3 times the number of applications as they have units. So it's a pretty intense administrative process. And those properties are scheduled to go online from July through the end of this calendar year. And number 18 is to form the Virginia Village Redevelopment Planning Work Group. And this will happen once the closing of Virginia Village happens with Wesley. And then it's part of the documentation that they form a work group in order to determine how to retain affordability in that neighborhood. So still looking at starting that in the first quarter of FY 2025. However, I know that there's a meeting happening tomorrow morning, and so there may be a little bit of adjustment to that timeline. Number 19 is develop the affordable living policy for council adoption. That is in process, and there is a clear pathway underway to completion of the policy by the end of the year. So we can expect the first draft of the policy in the first quarter of FY 2025. And then there is a significant public engagement period that will go from the first into the second quarters with the final draft of the policy coming to council in the second quarter of FY 2025, probably November, December timeframe. And then the final initiative under housing, Andy's going to cover.
So this one is, I think one familiar to council. So develop zoning code amendments for consideration that would allow for accessory dwelling units. So got a pretty extensive community engagement process, that we've mapped out through the bulk of FY 25 with the goal of final consideration, should we get to that point, via town hall boards and commissions review, planning commission and city council in the third quarter of FY 25. As well as advocating the city position when the General Assembly takes up local authorities in the 2025 session. So with that, we'll take questions on housing.
If I could just jump in really quickly, if we could scroll back up to 16, I think the scope of this is not just tax credit properties that are expiring. We have ADUs that are also expiring. Was that what you all were thinking, or were you thinking of limiting it just to units with tax credits?
I think both, actually. It's, we are thinking of tax credit property, but we have ADUs that, so in short, both.
Well, good. I just want to make sure that we were clear on the scope of that, and then we can jump into questions. Erin?
So I think we're going to add there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Two kind of bigger picture points. When I look at the housing initiative, and the work that each of these initiatives are going to take in terms of like a heavy lift of them, I have some concern about how many of them, have an HHS lead in terms of the staffing and the demands on staff for each one of these. And so I would like, I guess, the city manager's office to kind of take stock of that. Like for me, 16, for example, almost feels like the city manager's office should be listed there. I'm not clear on what assemble a work group means, like who's in the work group, engaging with property owners, like who's responsible for doing that engagement. So I think we, as a council, are going to be very interested in sort of strategizing and providing direction, and also want to have accountability for making sure that this is moving forward, because I at least view these 2 years as extremely critical to thinking about like what is our plan for preserving existing affordable housing, and what do we need to do now, and what do we need to plan for over the next few years to make sure that we're successful when these ADUs sunset, when these tax credits expire. And so I think as the city manager's office and the council, like if we don't accomplish something on this in this 2 years, it's going to be like an abject failure on all of us. So I would like to have far more accountability there than this seems to reflect at this point in time. And then my second point was just that I think when we talked about this priority, we also talked about sort of aging in place and affordability concerns. And so one of the things that I would still like to see in this priority area is looking at our tax code for some kind of tax relief or kind of staying in place improvements that we can have. So I've before mentioned sort of I think it's in Article 2 of the tax code, the different authority that we have for enacting ordinances. It's Article 3 of the tax code, around abatements and exemptions. And so the idea of, if you have homes that are over 15 or 20 years old, then if they do substantial improvements or renovations, that they might be able to get tax relief, or you don't get taxed on the increased value that would otherwise accompany those assessments. I think that there are similarly, if it doesn't already exist, it may now exist after this General Assembly session, tax incentives for historic structures and renovation and preservation of historic structures in terms of rebates or incentives. And so that's something I would hope that we can also take on in the housing initiative instead of not doing that in this 2-year period. So I'll put that out there for others' consideration.
Caroline?
Echo that I know DHS's capacity, and there's some big things here. So it's concerning that you've quoted consulting dollars at the top, but I'm not seeing it laced here when we maybe kind of need to be upfront on if we're supplementing some of these heavy lift items. I support 17, but that's a baseline program. That's just managing, getting our list moving, right? I mean, it's wonderful milestone to accomplish, but isn't that baseline?
It is, and so this one kind of doesn't meet it's a good comment on this one as well. It doesn't really meet that test. However, in discussing this with the team, they felt it very important that be front and center to everyone's awareness how important that mission was as we're considering these other initiatives, and that's why it's there.
I'd also just ask, is it the desire of DHS staff to let us know this is going to take a lot of honking time, which is why it's visible and on here, and I need to cover that? Like, just honestly, why?
Yeah, no, that's kind of what we're saying the same thing.
I totally agree. It's going to take a lot of time. Let's just think about the resourcing of it. And I think what we want to also address here is we've got programs that are being run by third parties that at some point are going to wind down, and we need a strategy for what we're doing. What are we doing with our shared equity program? When Amazon funding runs out in NHP, there's no money for NHP. So I think we just want to I would prefer to add some activities that actually provide for continuity of some of the programs that we've started to support diverse, attainable, sustainable, right? I don't want programs to drop off, that are great programs, but that shared equity program is one with NHP. So if we could consider what we're going to do with that. Right, so we've got, and let's see, Virginia Village, number 18, for Collaborate. I didn't know we needed to hire a consultant. When you say hire a consultant for the Virginia Village Redevelopment Planning Group, can you elaborate there on what you're thinking?
Sure, I've been working with our HHS team on that. What the concept is to put in a grant to Virginia Housing and then hire a consultant to help with the community engagement using somebody like Northern Virginia Housing Alliance or community groups tied to affordable housing to supplement and support the staff resources that you all are already identifying are going to be very robustly busy. So the idea would be that the core staff would work on developing the working group, get some recommendations together, bring that to council for adoption per the MOU. But then we'd have an additional consultant to help with working group meetings, bus tours, community engagement, town halls to gather the thoughts on the phase 3 of the MOU for redevelopment at Virginia Village. And so the funding right now is proposed to be a grant through Virginia Housing, which is very highly probable be awarding. The application's actually due tomorrow, so we're actually actively working it.
Oh, that's good. So we're targeting a grant, so it's funded.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a grant application for Virginia Village Community Engagement. There's also under consideration a grant application and a consultant to help with the affordable living policy from the working group that's happening now to actually drafting the policy with some community engagement town halls related to that.
Okay. So we've got first QFY25 on that. We're feeling good on that?
That was based on input from our team.
Okay.
And the timing of the grant award and procurement.
Okay. And okay, I'm gonna pause and let others speak for now.
Other comments on housing? Okay, I've got two things. This is kind of like shared parking where hopefully somebody's working on it, but I know that we've invested in more deeply affordable units. I don't know whether that's an opportunity to continue. And I think the Housing Commission as well has called out serving the 0% AMI, people experiencing homelessness population as a priority as well. So while we may be planning for something long-term at the property yard and expansion of the homeless shelter, I don't know if there's any near-term action, but I wanted to call that out as a gap. Second item, plus one on Aaron's comments. So for me, on whether it's rehab or credits, it's really slowing down the loss of our starter home stock in our neighborhoods. I think we talk about losing affordable units when they expire because of the ADU program expiry or LIHTC properties, but we lose naturally affordable single-family home stock right now. And I don't know, and I think in the past, I remember CPEDs had come to us with like a R1B proposal about non-conforming lots, and there was ideas out there on could you give people tax credits to upkeep their home so that they're not forced to sell and then for it to turn into a 6-bedroom, $2.5 million home. Like there's ideas like that, and I think it's been talked about as another arm of slowing down this loss of affordable and a broad term stock. I know those are two adds and not subtracts. Erin, is that what you were getting at with?
You know, and there are different ways to do it. You could, right, have tax credits, you could
do grants
right,
for
yeah.
rehab, and yes, it could be sliding scale based on income.
There could be people with mid-century homes that like, you know, decide to do that. They could potentially put them under the historic ordinance. You give a, you know, purchaser a year, bona fide purchaser a year before they're competing with a developer. So like there are combinations of things with better kind of education about what owners could do who aren't pre-1910 or what people might want to do after making that investment and not having the increased taxes on it, but potentially, you know, passing that investment on to a buyer who could afford it as opposed to having that investment ripped down, you know, in new development. So they're all kind of just like more creative thinking about trying to keep that housing stock available in the city.
Caroline, did you have other comments on housing?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Okay, moving on to governance.
So good governance. So she's been here all of 2 weeks, or barely 2 weeks, our new OCOM director. 1 week. She's only been here 1 week. It's the beginning of the second week. So the first initiative under good governance is refreshing and updating the city website. And OCOM will be the lead in a refresh and/or upgrade to the city website. So all departments will be involved in this process, and primarily starting with assessing the current website, looking at data analysis, and the assessment will be important in taking a look at determining the scope of work. So that is kind of another one that's right at the beginning stages for that particular initiative. And Mary Catherine has wonderful ideas, so when it comes to the website. The next one, actually, Andy is going to cover.
I'll jump in with number 22. So we're proposing to update the utilities and facilities chapter of the comprehensive plan. You know, the current version of this chapter dates back to 2010. This chapter update provides an opportunity for long-range planning of facility and utility needs. Needs assessments will account for recent and ongoing investments, the latest demographic projections, and industry best practices for facility planning. And so when you look at the current utilities and facilities chapter of the comprehensive plan, you know, it covers things like schools, libraries, the community center, public safety, and as well on the utility side, you know, water, our favorite topic, sewer, electricity, broadband, you know, those kinds of things. So CPEDS would be our lead for this chapter update. Public Works would be heavily involved. The schedule that we've included in the staff report's probably on the aggressive side for the scope of this. So, you know, with some kickoff with the Planning Commission, I think, you know, coming up this first quarter, and with the goal of getting to final consideration with council in the fourth quarter of FY25. Jenny, back over to you.
So the next one, number 23, is developing a citywide customer service program. This not only encompasses training and development, it is also to look at a comprehensive assessment and updating our city customer service approach, including our customer service philosophy, and then provision of support to employees in delivery of customer service. And the focus will be on provision of excellent external, meaning the community, and internal, meaning other employees, colleagues, peers, customer service. And that is scheduled to start in the next fiscal year, and then into 2026, we'll be reassessing as necessary the customer service delivery. So developing the program, implementing, and then having an assessment period in 2026. For the last, well, actually, it's not the last item. The last item that I have is number 24. And this initiative came out of the feedback through the cultural assessment and the employee surveys and our goal with this initiative is to develop a compensation philosophy and then follow through with strategies to ensure that the city is delivering a competitive plan that provides clear career paths to all employees and potential new employees. And also that our development and growth opportunities are communicated with transparency and consistently so that all employees understand what programs are available to them throughout the city. This HR is the lead in this department. We are currently recruiting for our new HR director. So when that person is onboarded, this will become a priority for them as well. And all departments will be involved in this initiative as well. And Wyatt, do we want to end there, or did you want to move to the additional bad?
I can speak to the 25th initiative.
Yes.
And and I'll just cover it briefly. It's an initiative to build upon current practices for transparency in city land development processes, and I'll just say a little bit about that. The city currently has policy and practice to avoid conflicts of interest in the city in our budgeting functions, our purchasing functions, in our regulatory role, our tax collection roles, and importantly, in land use and real estate transactions. Those last two are really important as the city has been engaged, particularly in the last 5 years, in very significant land transactions, including the Virginia Tech site, West Falls site, and very significant land development cases, which are under construction right now. To my knowledge, when city officials throughout the city's history and over the past 5 years, when they have had a conflict, they have sought advice, they have recused themselves, and have provided disclosure of their role or their relationship. As we consider process improvements, as the city is growing, GovOps Committee has discussed possibly having a review of our processes with respect to public disclosures associated with the land development and land purchase and sale process. And so what this action would be is to review the city's current disclosure of real parties of interest form, which all developers must fill out when they submit a special exception application. We could review that, assess the effectiveness of that form, possibly expand that form, clarify policy regarding disclosures, train staff, elected officials, and board and commission members on how to disclose and report any relationships with the subject property or an interested party. And then the third bullet would be, our practice would be to report and forward all that information to the city attorney so that she can evaluate it and give advice. So that's what this initiative is, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about that along with the others.
Sure, thanks a lot. I think this is a good set, including 25. Seems doable, and I think it provides good assurance to the public, but also good protection for the people that are active and doing things for the city. There's one area that's not mentioned here, which is kind of a top-to-bottom review of the city's financial sort of policies and models. We're carrying a significant amount of debt. We've modeled it. We've been responsible, but I'm wondering, it seems like every decade or so we take a comprehensive look at the finances, and let me ask, Wyatt, do you think this is the time for that sort of thing, or do you feel pretty comfortable that we don't really need that? But we've looked at our financial policies every now and then, and we're growing. We're larger significantly, and we've taken on a fair amount of debt. We plan to take on more debt. And I know, though, that we've modeled it. Should we just sort of do a checkup of that?
I think, in short, yes. I think it would be good for the council to review our financial policies again. We have new members of council, just to read them, be familiar with them, and make some updates to them. We did a big lift in the lead up to the high school project, and we changed our policies to accommodate that. And we anticipate that we're going to come back into compliance with our pre-high school project policy compliance in the next 2 years, which is good. We'll be back kind of in the more conservative models that we used to hold to. But before we needed to do the heavy financial lift for the high school. So it would be good to take a look at those again, at a minimum, refamiliarize ourselves with what they say, and then make some tweaks to them.
Dave, my 2 cents on this is that, you know, I don't know if it requires a special project to review financial policies. In fact, that's like a standard practice in nonprofit, private, public corporations. You do it every year. So I do think on the docket for Budget and Finance Committee is, you know, we took a look at the policies coming into, you know, the current fiscal cycle next year. I think we need to take a look at maybe even expanding it to look at, have this discussion with Wyatt on, you know, what's coming out of the Affordable Living Policy Work Group, right? Particularly in our housing area where we've got increased investments in a fund that perhaps isn't really considered sleepy anymore since it's growing. So that's an area I do think we need to take a look at. So I started the discussion, you know, with Wyatt at this Budget and Finance, but I do think that I just get concerned if it's a special project versus is just, you know, part of your, I call it daily hygiene, to review those policies every year. I mean, Wyatt, maybe you have a different perspective, but I don't think we should wait like years to look at all our financial policies.
Yeah, we have a practice of reviewing them every 2 years, and we have not done that with this new council. And so I think it would be good to, at a minimum, review them with the full council and consider changes to them.
Any other comments? Justine?
Overall, these look great. On number 23, something that we've been talking about for a while that I didn't see like explicitly in here was actually having some sort of tracker for residents. So somebody submits a concern, whether it's to council or directly through the request tracker, and then they can actually see updates where things are in the process, or even some sort of tracker for the the NTC program. So seeing where things are in a clear, easy format. So I would propose adding that as part of the discussion here. Now, that could be part of the researching support and resources for employees, but it's kind of beyond that.
So that's actually located under number 21, under the city website. So taking a look at the community request experience and tracking.
Great, okay, so that sort of, I guess, would be under the website category rather than the customer service category.
Yeah, and just to note that, you know, all of the initiatives that are listed, we've placed them under where we think they are the most appropriate priority. However, they may touch other priorities, they may touch other strategies within the priority. So there's a little bit of flexibility and flow because certainly a request tracker for the community would touch on some aspect of customer service.
Great. Okay, well, I'm glad to see it's in there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so I support the 5 initiatives that are here. For 22, I think this is what Councilmember Snyder was getting at. You know, I think it's good to have the longer range planning, and sewer, you know, will fit into some of that. But we had, when we kind of initially had our facilitated conversations around these priorities and initiatives, also talked about like the overarching managing growth and this 2-year period being a critical period for the city and transformative in terms of the number of units coming online, the increase to the city's population. And so I would also be interested, and I'm not sure kind of where it fits in, but with the fiscal policies, but also just in getting kind of more regular updates. And I know it happens at Budget and Finance, it happens through the projections and the budget amendments, but like just more updates maybe from the city manager in terms of, are our projections holding? Are the projected like revenues and costs aligned in terms of what we expected, so that we kind of aren't caught off guard when projects aren't coming online when we thought they would, or the costs are different than what we anticipated. So I guess I would just like a few more real-time updates during this 2-year cycle to gauge kind of how we're doing in the projections versus where we actually find ourselves.
Including the number of students that come in from that to make sure we're on.
Yeah.
And by projections, you mean like revenue projections?
Revenues and costs,
Population
like, because we, do the revenue side of things, even when we get the mixed-use fiscal, like, reports, but then the cost side of things, like the sewer costs attendant to that, don't often come in the same report. So I would like a more holistic view of revenues, costs, how they're aligning to projections and where we're kind of finding ourselves. In what I think everyone has recognized is a, like, high change period in this 2-year kind of cycle in particular. And
We are due for the mixed use, because we do the mixed use fiscal impact report every 2 years. I think we're due for that in this coming year, Wyatt, but I think that's less real time than I think what is clunkier to actually generate that than ideal, right? Because we get actual students, but we don't get costs as much because they're kind of shared across the city. But anyway, if we can sync that up to the process that the EDO has already in the mixed use fiscal impact report. I hear the intent, but
yeah, so just to think about how we can do that in a way that we can have some expectation of when we're getting updates with this information. And then on 24, I support looking at the compensation system. I think when we have a new HR director, there are kind of broader organizational health type things that we were also capturing kind of under the good governance. And so for employee engagement, employee satisfaction, like workplace culture, that they also are things that we're continuing to work on, even if we're identifying like 24 as the priority area, so to speak, for more council attention.
Caroline, you had?
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is under good governance, I think we're missing a 26. And that 26, for consideration, not trying to push, is something that really ties, before we enter a SIP cycle, right, we need to take a look at sharing the results of the inputs that you use to show the proposal to council what shows on SIP, but that should be based on a refresh of some of our economic models and with the projections and the impacts on, utilities, facilities, right? Like, I think if what I'm hearing correctly is that we're missing under good governance a way to tie the due diligence of where we stand to what is going into a SIP. I'm trying to extrapolate kind of, I hear what you're saying, and it does make sense, but are we saying we're missing a 26? Where that is specifically called out, where we take a look at our SIP cycles and what drives the inputs into, those big projects where sometimes, sewer or whatever, we're raising debt, and take a look at how we kind of manage the runway for that, lack of a better word.
Are we talking about
Just thought
CIP?
bubbles.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not tracking that totally. So one takeaway is, we have our quarterly financial reports, and sort of thinking about that more as a dashboard on how we're doing on revenues, but there's a lot behind that. How, Cindy, and just sort of think about how we take that signal and turn that into something that's usable and also is like something that we can produce on a sustained basis.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that kind of dashboard idea in your mind, and how do you integrate it into something you're already doing? Because it lands in different places, and I just want it to be integrated more regularly into something we're seeing, and that we're getting those updates, and that we're also getting the hey, these are the projections we're thinking of. Don't be surprised when you see the multi-million-dollar surprise, and it's, like where it came from and how we can course correct or what we need to do in terms of course correction, if at all.
That's right.
Thank you.
Good. Other governance items? Final work plan, priority thoughts? Justine?
So we'll dive into each one of these topics in more depth in the next few weeks, months. Hopefully everything would wrap up by September or so. But then that basically makes this a 1.25 year work plan. And so what I'm wondering is, for this process going forward and the next time we go through this, would we want this work plan to actually last until this time in 2 years? And whenever the next council comes in, if, they want to change everything up, that can be a discussion, but so that things don't suddenly come to a halt in, for the 3/4 of a year.
Yeah, so nothing is coming to a halt. Most of the things that are listed here are things that are already underway, and we're kind of articulating them. Some of them are in the Gantt chart, might be phased out a little bit. So this work session thing is not a slowdown on the process. It's not on the critical path. So that should not be a concern. I think the main thing with these work session discussions, though, is to try to, this is a collaboration of staff and the governing body working together on the main areas of change we're trying to affect in the city, and to try to keep those work sessions fairly disciplined as well, because in settings like this, it is natural. Everyone does it. What about this idea? What about that idea? It's just what we do as human beings. But as an organization, we're going to try to stay focused on executing what we commit to. That's what this whole thing is about, and being able to have a plan that we can sustain. So having that mindset going into those work sessions, I think that would be good to do deeper dives.
And I guess the suggestion for that is if we did just add too many things, then having some sort of dot process or voting procedure, I think we can absolutely narrow things down.
So I am thinking of this process, I think staff is thinking about this process as a collaboration with the governing body. I have not, and I should have said this at the intro, I was not anticipating that the city council was ever going to have to sort of vote on this list of initiatives. We're having discussions about what's most important of what we can get done over the next 2 years. And this is going to be a continual discussion over the course of the 2 years. It's not going to stop. But this is a good planning together. Are we doing the right stuff? Are we aligned? I'm hearing mostly that we are. There's some ads that we need to talk, go back and see if, can we commit to that and really put we want this to be a fully committed, all-in plan. And so we'll give you that feedback, and we're anticipating that we'll do that at these work sessions with some of the additional input that has come in tonight.
Thank you.
Mary Beth?
I'll just add to that, Ms. Underhill, that typically this is sort of how the work plans flow, where the first 6 months of a new council with new members, you're completing what was started in the previous 2 years. So this will end up being a 2-year work plan, because 2 years from now, when there's someone else, there's going to be election and there may be new people, they're going to step in, but it takes a while to figure out what we're doing. So this will continue. So it always ends up being more than 2-year work plan and overlap and all those kind of things.
My general, I guess previously though, the work plan had been done before the budget, or is that not the case?
No, we're actually ahead of schedule.
This is the most organized we've ever had.
Okay, well then that's great to hear.
Debbie?
I just wanted to take a step back and thank everybody on staff for taking on this new approach. I know it was, there have been a lot of changes in the past year. We have a new police chief, we have a new attorney, we have a new communications director, we have a new structure. This is a new process. So we have 2 new council members. There's a lot that's happened in the past year, and I know we all have high expectations, and I'm just really pleased with receiving this back and having the discussions that are iterative discussions, to your point, Wyatt, about this is, really feeling a collaboration about what's being worked on and having multiple conversations along the way that aren't just, okay, 2 years from now, we'll pull this back out and we'll look at that list of 100 things and the red light, green light, I think this is super promising, and I just appreciate all the work that everybody has put into delivering this. I know change is hard, and there's been a ton of it. So thank you to everybody for putting in a tremendous amount of work, and I'm sure you knew there'd be more ads and more questions tonight, but thank you for being receptive to them and figuring out the best way to address them too. So great job.
Yes, well said, ditto on that. On that note about kind of two things, I think one for my colleagues up here is one, we have heard from staff that it is important for us to be disciplined and kind of commit to a shorter list. And so be prepared that when they come back to us in work session and say, hey, we cannot get to these things, or if we do, we're going to have to take some things off. So I want us to be prepared for that conversation and be open to that. Second, so that we are all holding ourselves accountable to progress on these things. I'm a big fan of how do we measure progress. And I think there's two ways to go about it, right? One is the traditional project manager approach, which is measure your project status, red, yellow, green. Are we hitting the dates? The other is outcome-based. So are we delivering on no fatalities if we adopt Vision Zero? Are we adding, tracking our greenhouse gas emissions if we do everything in the government and community energy plan? So I would love for staff to give that thought, because a plan is only as good as if you measure your progress against it and then continuously improve and work towards those goals. So I would love for staff to give thought on how we can keep holding ourselves to these projects, initiatives that we say are important, so that we can keep moving forward. So thank you all, really nice work and good discussion. Thank you all for the very in-depth 2+ hour discussion on this.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know we have a few more items left on the agenda with minutes. Are there any other items before we get to minutes? We have committee and liaison reports, council member comments. Debbie?
Before Andy leaves, I also just want to thank Andy and Kurt for working through the entire Community Energy Action Plan and Government Operations Action Plan at last week's ESC meeting. We spent a tremendous amount of time, and I know that everybody was duly impressed with how much work Kurt had done in a very short amount of time, how he'd kind of tackled head-on several big projects. And, there were always more requests from that crew as well. However, we really appreciate the time and effort, and it was really, I thought, quite exciting to see some progress, having served on that as a liaison for years to that group. It was really fun to see outcomes that were happening and measurable, to your point, and meeting the reporting goals of when they came back and reported to ESC. So thank you to Andy and to Kurt as well for that. Much appreciated.
I appreciate that, and I'll be sure to pass along your thoughts to Kurt as well. Thank you.
Great. Other comments? Dave?
Yeah, in the consent calendar, we breezed past the compensation for our 3 direct employees, and I just want to say that I much appreciate the work that you do, and you really are fundamental to making the city perform on behalf of the public. And the fact that it went through consent is an indication, I think, of how unanimously we feel about your work. And but I didn't want it to go unrecognized on the record that you do an incredible amount of work on behalf of the public, and you oversee other people who are working as part of your teams very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Debbie for leading the process this year, too.
Just a quick update on the Affordable Living Work Group. We're meeting on Wednesday. I think we're targeting to get a draft out, but we're slowly cranking through the recommendations. We just did recommendations for rental housing, and up this Wednesday night is recommendations for affordable housing preservation. And then the next meeting, we're moving into home ownership and housing diversity. So we're trucking along with, literally, I think probably at 20% complete. But we'll catch up. We've got July and August. So that's the update from the Affordable Living Work Group team.
Great. Any other comments? Okay, moving on to approval of minutes. There's 3 batches. Who's read them?
I read them.
Mary Beth, do you have a motion?
Yeah, they were great. I move to approve the minutes. Can I do all 3 at once? Of April 29th, 2024, May 13th, 2024, and May 28th, 2024.
We have a second.
Second.
Debbie on the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions or nays? No. Okay, the minutes are approved.
Thank you, council.
Any other final business, or are we adjourning the meeting?
Move to adjourn.
Alrighty, let's adjourn. Good night, all.
Good night. Thank you, council.